Stand at the edge of the ocean on any clear morning, and what you see is deceptive in its simplicity. Sunlight catches the surface, turning it into a sheet of scattered diamonds. Waves rise and fall in rhythms older than human memory. Seabirds trace invisible patterns overhead, their cries carried on salt-heavy air. This is the ocean. We know the one we photograph, the one that appears on postcards and travel documentaries. But everything you've ever seen of the ocean, every image that comes to mind when you think of the sea, is just the thinnest skin of something far deeper and stranger than mountains are tall. Slip beneath that glittering surface, and immediately the world begins to change. The sounds of wind and birds fade into something else, a deep, encompassing quiet, broken only by the strange clicks and groans of a submerged world. The sunlight that seemed so bright above now filters down in shafts and columns, illuminating particles suspended in the water like dust motes in a cathedral. And here, just below the surface, the ocean reveals its first secret. It isn't one world, but many, stacked one atop another, in invisible layers that stretch down into darkness. As you sink deeper, the first thing you notice is the color. Sunlight, which appears white above the waves, is actually composed of every color in the spectrum. But water is selective about what it allows to pass through. Red light, with its longer wavelength, is absorbed first. Within just 10 meters, reds begin to fade. Blood looks green down here. A red fish becomes gray, then black. 20 meters down, and orange disappears too, then yellow. The world becomes progressively bluer, as if you're descending through layers of sapphire, each one deeper and more saturated than the last. The temperature shifts with the light. The sun-warmed surface waters give way to something cooler against your skin. Not cold yet, but noticeably different. There's a sensation of pressure building, subtle at first, like the feeling in your ears on an airplane. The water presses in from all directions with equal force, a gentle but insistent reminder that you're entering an environment fundamentally different from the air-filled world above. Marine life becomes simultaneously more abundant and more strange. Schools of fish move through the blue like coordinated thoughts, turning in perfect unison as if controlled by a single mind. Jellyfish pulse past, translucent bells contracting and relaxing in meditation-like rhythm. Everything here exists in motion, in constant relationship with currents you can feel but not see, flowing in patterns determined by forces that operate on scales too large for any single creature to comprehend. But it's the light, or rather, the slow theft of light, that defines this descent. Every meter downward is a step away from the sun's reach, a gradual transition from the bright, familiar world into something unknown. By the time you've descended 100 meters, you're existing in a blue twilight, a realm where shadows become meaningful, and visibility shrinks to a sphere around you that grows smaller with each passing moment. The surface, if you look up, appears as a distant bright ceiling, wavering and unreachable. This is where the ocean's architecture becomes apparent. You're passing through the epipelagic zone, the sunlight zone, where photosynthesis is still possible and life operates according to rules we understand. But below, waiting in the increasing dimness, lie other zones with other rules. The twilight zone, where light becomes memory. The midnight zone, where darkness is absolute. And deeper still, realms with names that sound like they belong in mythology rather than science. The question hangs in the water, like the particles catching the last rays of filtered light. If this is what exists just below the surface, what waits in the layers beneath, where the blue fades to black, and the familiar world becomes something else entirely. Between 200 and 1,000 meters beneath the surface lies a realm that exists in permanent dusk. Scientists call it the mesopelagic zone, but twilight zone feels more accurate, a place caught between the world of light above and the absolute darkness below. Here, sunlight still reaches, but only barely. It arrives weak and exhausted from its journey through hundreds of meters of water, carrying just enough illumination to create shadows, but not enough to fuel the photosynthesis that drives life in the shallows. This is a world suspended in perpetual evening, where day never truly arrives and night never completely falls. The physics of this zone creates something remarkable. an environment where seeing and being seen become matters of life and death. The dim blue light filtering from above is just strong enough to cast silhouettes, which means any creature swimming here projects a shadow against the faint brightness overhead. Predators have learned to hunt these shadows, watching the ceiling of their world for the telltale darkening that indicates prey passing above. In response, prey species have evolved to become nearly invisible, their bodies flattened and reflective, their undersides designed to match the dim glow above and erase their own shadows. But the most extraordinary thing about this twilight realm isn't the creatures that live here permanently, it's the ones that visit. Every single evening, as the sun sets on the surface far above, billions of organisms begin rising from these depths toward the shallows to feed. Zooplankton, small fish, squid, jellyfish, they ascend through hundreds of meters of water in a migration so massive it was initially mistaken for the seafloor itself. During World War II, when navies first deployed sonar to map the ocean bottom, they detected a mysterious layer that appeared to rise and fall with predictable rhythm. They called it the deep scattering layer, and for years, no one understood what it was. It seemed impossible that the seafloor could move. Only later did researchers realize they were detecting not rock but life. Countless millions of creatures commuting between the depths and the surface in the largest daily migration of biomass on Earth. This vertical journey happens every night in every ocean, driven by hunger and fear in equal measure. The creatures rise to feed on the abundant plankton near the surface under cover of darkness, then retreat to the safety of the dim depths before dawn brings visual predators that could easily spot them in brighter waters. It's a rhythm that has continued for millions of years, a twice-daily pulse that moves nutrients and energy between the ocean's layers, connecting the surface world to the deep in ways we're only beginning to understand. Among the permanent residents of this twilight realm swim some of the ocean's most elegantly adapted creatures. Lanternfish, small and silvery, carry rows of bioluminescent organs along their bodies, tiny lights arranged in species-specific patterns like constellations. In the dimness, these lights serve as recognition signals, allowing individuals to identify their own kind in a realm where visual communication would otherwise be impossible. Each species carries its own unique pattern, a glowing signature that says, "I am like you." The hatchetfish has taken a different approach to survival in the shadows. Its body is compressed to the thinness of a blade, presenting almost no silhouette when viewed from below. But its most striking feature is its eyes' tubular organs pointed permanently upward, scanning the faint light above for the shadows of smaller creatures. These fish have essentially become shadow hunters, living their entire lives staring at the ceiling of their world, waiting for darkness to pass overhead. Everything here exists in a delicate balance between visibility and invisibility, between creating light and avoiding detection. These creatures have learned to read the subtle gradations of dimness, to navigate by the memory of where brightness should be rather than what they can actually see. But even this faint connection to the sun's light is temporary. Deeper still, the last traces of surface illumination finally surrender to something else entirely, a darkness so complete that the only light comes from life itself. At approximately 1,000 meters beneath the surface, something fundamental changes. This is the boundary where sunlight, no matter how sensitive the eye detecting it, simply ceases to exist. Water molecules have finally absorbed and scattered every last photon that began its journey at the sun's surface, traveled 93 million miles through space, and penetrated the ocean's upper layers. Below this point, the sun has never shone not once in the 4.5 billion year history of Earth. This threshold marks the entrance to the bathypelagic zone, a realm that exists in darkness so complete it redefines what darkness means. The physics behind this boundary are straightforward but profound. Light travels through water differently than through air. Water molecules, along with dissolved salts and microscopic particles, interact with photons at every wavelength. Red light disappears first, within meters of the surface. Blue light, with its shorter wavelength, penetrates deepest, but even blue light has limits. By the time you reach 1,000 meters, the last traces of that distant blue have been absorbed, scattered, and converted to heat. What remains is darkness of a quality that has no equivalent on land. The deepest cave, sealed from all external light, is still darkness by absence, darkness that exists because light has been blocked. But here in the midnight zone, darkness exists because light cannot reach this far. No amount of adaptation, no conceivable enhancement of vision, could detect sunlight at these depths, because there is literally nothing to detect. This is darkness by distance, darkness by the fundamental limits of physics. It's a darkness that presses in with the weight of 1,000 meters of water above it, a darkness that has persisted unchanged since the oceans first formed. By every reasonable expectation, this should be a dead zone. Nearly all life we understand depends ultimately on photosynthesis, on organisms that can capture sunlight and convert it into energy that flows through food chains and ecosystems. Remove the sun, and conventional wisdom suggests you remove the foundation of life itself. Yet the midnight zone is anything but lifeless. In fact, it may contain more living creatures than all other ocean zones combined. The secret lies in a process that seems almost magical in its elegance. In the absolute darkness, life has learned to create its own light. Approximately 90% of creatures in the deep ocean are bioluminescent. They possess the ability to produce light through chemical reactions in their bodies. Special cells, called photophores, contain luciferin molecules that, when combined with oxygen and specific enzymes, produce cold light with almost perfect efficiency. No heat, no wasted energy, just pure illumination generated from chemistry alone. This revelation transforms everything about how we understand the midnight zone. What appears from the outside as absolute darkness is actually filled with light, just not light from the sun. Instead, it's living light, created by intention and purpose. If you could somehow survive at these depths, with eyes adapted to the darkness, you wouldn't see blackness. You'd see something closer to a galaxy, countless points of light flickering on and off, pulsing in patterns, glowing in blues and greens, and occasionally reds. Bioluminescent bacteria drifting in clouds, fish with rows of lights along their bodies, jellyfish trailing luminescent tentacles, squid flashing complex signals to each other in languages we cannot yet read. The midnight zone hasn't simply adapted to darkness, it has transformed darkness into something else entirely. Something that challenges our definitions of what light is and where it comes from. Below this threshold, the rules change. The sun's dominance ends. And in that ending, a different kind of illumination begins, created not by fusion in a distant star, but by chemistry in living cells, producing a hidden galaxy that exists in the deep, unseen by the surface world, following patterns and purposes we're only beginning to comprehend. In the midnight zone, where the sun's light has never reached, organisms haven't simply adapted to darkness, they've reinvented what light means. Bioluminescence here isn't decorative or accidental. It's functional, purposeful, and in many ways more sophisticated than any communication system that exists in the sunlit world above. These creatures use light the way surface animals use sound or scent as a language, a tool, a weapon, and a disguise all at once. Some don't just make light, they speak with it, in patterns and codes we've barely begun to translate. Consider counter-illumination, one of the most elegant invisibility techniques in nature. Many fish and squid in the deep possess photophores on their undersides that glow with precisely calibrated intensity. When a predator looks up from below, it sees not the dark silhouette of prey against faint overhead light, but rather a seamless continuation of that dim glow. The prey essentially erases its own shadow, becoming transparent, not through tissue, but through technology. Biological LEDs that match the background so perfectly, the creature vanishes. Some species can adjust the intensity and color of this light in real time, compensating for changes in depth or the angle of viewing. It's camouflage that requires constant calculation, constant awareness of how you appear to eyes below. Then there are the lures. The anglerfish has become famous for this strategy, though its actual appearance remains strange no matter how many times you see it. A modified dorsal fin spine extends forward above the fish's enormous mouth, and at its tip dangles a bulb of bioluminescent bacteria, thousands of them, cultivated and maintained in a specialized organ, glowing steadily in the darkness. Small fish and crustaceans, drawn to what appears to be food or perhaps another small glowing creature, approach the light. They don't recognize the massive mouth in the shadows behind it until far too late. The anglerfish doesn't chase. It simply waits, motionless except for that single glowing lure, patient as stone, letting curiosity do the hunting. Warning signals pulse through the darkness in bright, startling flashes. Some jellyfish, when threatened, explode into brilliant bioluminescence, not to see or communicate, but to startle predators, or perhaps attract larger predators to attack whatever is threatening them. It's the deep-sea equivalent of a burglar alarm, designed to create a tension and chaos that might allow escape. Other creatures release clouds of glowing chemicals when attacked, leaving luminescent decoys hanging in the water while they flee into darkness. But perhaps the most remarkable use of bioluminescence belongs to a creature that has turned light itself into a weapon. The cookie-cutter shark, small and unremarkable at first glance, has evolved one of the ocean's most cunning hunting strategies. Its body glows with soft bioluminescence produced by photophores covering its underside, except for a dark collar around its throat that remains completely black. When viewed from below, this creates a specific silhouette. A small fish, perhaps 6 inches long, swimming alone in the darkness. Larger predators, tuna, marlin, even whales, see what appears to be easy prey and approach from below to attack. What happens next occurs in seconds. As the predator closes in, the cookie-cutter shark suddenly spins. Its circular mouth, lined with razor-sharp triangular teeth, arranged like a saw blade, clamps onto the predator's flesh. The shark rotates its entire body, and those specialized teeth carve out a perfect circular plug of meat and blubber, a cookie-cutter wound that gives the shark its name. Then it releases and disappears back into darkness, leaving behind a distinctive crater in the predator's skin. Whales that migrate through deep waters often surface bearing dozens of these circular scars, permanent records of encounters they likely never saw coming. The cookie-cutter doesn't overpower its prey. It deceives them with light, lures them close with a shadow, and takes what it needs before vanishing. These strategies suggest something profound about bioluminescence in the deep. It's not random or simple. Each flash, each glow, each pattern carries meaning and purpose, refined over millions of years. And what we've documented may be only a fraction of the whole story. Some researchers believe certain deep-sea creatures produce bioluminescence in ultraviolet or infrared wavelengths, colors invisible to human eyes and undetectable by most of our cameras. There may be entire conversations happening in the deep ocean, signals and responses, and complex communications occurring in frequencies we cannot perceive, a hidden language written in light we'll never see. Not all predators in the midnight zone rely on their own light. Some have evolved to become masters of detecting the light others produce, turning the bioluminescence that fills the darkness into a hunting advantage. The giant squid possesses what may be the most sophisticated light detection system in the animal kingdom, eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes of any creature that has ever lived. These enormous organs aren't built for vanity. They're designed to gather every available photon in an environment where light is scarce beyond measure. The physics of these eyes reveals their purpose with elegant clarity. The larger a lens, the more light it can collect. In the near-total darkness of the deep ocean, size matters more than acuity. A giant squid's eye can detect the faintest bioluminescent glow from distances we're still trying to measure, possibly kilometers away through the black water. When a fish struggles in the distance, its movement triggers bioluminescence in disturbed plankton or in its own photophores. That brief flash, invisible to human eyes at such range, registers clearly in the squid's massive visual field. The squid sees not shapes or colors, but patterns of light and movement, constellations that suddenly appear and betray the location of prey or threat. These squid hunt in a realm we've never witnessed directly. They move through the midnight zone on hunting circuits that might span hundreds of kilometers, their tentacles extending and retracting, their bodies shifting color through chromatophores, even in absolute darkness, perhaps communicating with each other, perhaps practicing camouflage for the moment when bioluminescence suddenly illuminates them. Everything we know about their behavior comes from fragments, specimens that wash ashore, brief glimpses from deep-sea cameras, and the marks they leave on their predators. Because giant squid, despite their size and their remarkable eyes, are themselves prey. Sperm whales dive into the midnight zone specifically to hunt them, descending to depths that would crush most air-breathing animals, holding their breath for over an hour while pursuing prey they cannot see. These encounters happen in darkness so complete that neither creature relies on vision. Instead, the whale uses something more powerful than light: sound. The sperm whale produces the loudest biological sound on Earth. From the massive oil-filled chamber in its enormous square head, it generates clicks that exceed 200 decibels, louder than a rocket launch. Powerful enough that if you were somehow swimming next to a clicking sperm whale, the sound waves could vibrate your body from the inside, potentially causing physical harm. But this isn't a weapon. It's echolocation, refined to a degree that seems almost supernatural. The whale sends out clicks that travel through water for miles, bouncing off squid, fish, the seafloor, and returning as echoes. From these echoes, the whale constructs a mental map of everything around it, not a visual image, but an acoustic picture that reveals size, distance, texture, and even the internal structure of objects. Sound becomes vision in the deep. Where light fails completely, pressure waves carry information through the darkness with perfect reliability. A sperm whale can likely sense a giant squid from thousands of meters away, tracking its movements through the echoes it creates, closing the distance while the squid's massive eyes search uselessly for bioluminescent clues about what's approaching. When whale and squid finally meet, the encounter is swift and savage, a battle between titans that happens in absolute darkness, witnessed by no one, recorded only in the circular scars that squid suckers leave on whale skin, and the squid beaks that accumulate in whale stomachs. These battles have been happening for millions of years, long before humans existed to wonder about them. They occur miles below the surface, in a realm we cannot visit without elaborate technology, following patterns and strategies we can only infer from indirect evidence. The sperm whale surfaces eventually, bearing fresh scars, and we imagine what happened in the depths. The giant squid that escapes carries its own wounds, marks from teeth that closed but didn't hold, and continues hunting with eyes that have seen things no human ever will. Both creatures represent the pinnacle of deep ocean predation, one that sees the faintest light, one that creates sound powerful enough to map darkness itself. But not all hunters in the midnight zone are so active. Some have discovered that in an environment where food is scarce and encounters are rare, the most efficient strategy isn't chasing prey at all. It's simply waiting. In an environment where encounters are rare and energy is precious, some predators have abandoned the chase entirely. They don't patrol territories or stalk prey through the darkness. Instead, they've perfected a different approach: absolute stillness. Some hunters in the deep don't pursue, they become living traps, patient as stone, waiting in the dark for weeks or months if necessary, conserving every calorie until opportunity drifts within reach. The anglerfish embodies this strategy with an almost meditative purity. Picture one, hovering motionless in the water column, suspended at neutral buoyancy, requiring almost no energy to maintain position. Its body remains completely still, no swimming motion, no adjustment of fins, nothing that might create vibrations or disturbance. Only one thing moves: the lure. A modified dorsal spine extends forward from above its head, and at the tip dangles a small bulb of living light. Inside this bulb, bioluminescent bacteria live in a relationship so ancient it predates most modern fish lineages. The bacteria glow continuously, fed by the anglerfish's blood supply, and in exchange, they provide the light that makes everything else possible. The anglerfish can control this glow with remarkable precision, adjusting intensity and creating patterns by contracting tissues around the light organ or by adjusting blood flow. The lure bobs gently in the current, mimicking the movement of small prey, perhaps a shrimp, perhaps something else that glows. In the absolute darkness, this tiny point of light becomes irresistible, Curious fish and crustaceans approach, drawn by what might be food or a potential mate, or simply by the fundamental attraction that light holds in a lightless world. They edge closer, investigating, trying to determine what this glowing thing might be. The anglerfish waits. Its enormous mouth, which can be larger than its entire body when fully extended, remains closed. Its teeth, curved inward like the bars of a cage, stay hidden. There's no visible threat, nothing to suggest danger, just a small light bobbing in the current. The prey moves closer still, perhaps reaching out to touch or taste this strange glowing object. And then, in a fraction of a second, the anglerfish's mouth explodes outward. The speed is faster than human eyes could track. The mouth opens so rapidly it creates a vacuum that sucks in not just the prey but a sphere of water around it. By the time the prey registers what's happening, it's already inside, and those inward curved teeth prevent any escape. The mouth closes. The anglerfish returns to stillness, digesting its meal over days or weeks, waiting once again. But perhaps the strangest aspect of anglerfish biology has nothing to do with hunting. It concerns reproduction in an environment where finding a mate might be nearly impossible. Male anglerfish are tiny, sometimes 100 times smaller than females, and they face a challenge that seems insurmountable: locating a female of their own species in the vast darkness of the midnight zone. The solution they've evolved is so extreme, it seems like science fiction. When a male encounters a female, he bites onto her body and never lets go. Over time, his tissues fuse with hers. His bloodstream connects to hers. His organs degenerate: eyes, fins, most internal structures gradually disappear until he becomes nothing more than a sperm-producing appendage, a permanent parasite dependent entirely on her body for survival. Some females have been found with multiple males attached, a living collection of mates fused to her skin. This isn't cooperation or partnership in any conventional sense. It's biological merger, a solution to the problem of encountering another member of your species, perhaps once in an entire lifetime. The male sacrifices everything: independence, identity, even his own body structure, to ensure his genetic material will be available when the female is ready to spawn. It's one of the most extreme examples of sexual parasitism in nature, an adaptation that only makes sense in an environment as vast and empty as the deep ocean. Other ambush predators have developed their own extraordinary solutions. The gulper eel possesses a mouth that can unhinge and expand to swallow prey significantly larger than its own body, its jaw articulating in ways that seem anatomically impossible, its stomach capable of stretching to accommodate meals that might not come again for months. All these strategies share a common principle. In the deep ocean, patience isn't just a virtue, it's survival. But we've only descended to about 3,000 meters, only halfway to the true ocean floor. Deeper still, conditions become even more extreme, food even scarcer. And the question becomes not how creatures hunt, but whether survival itself remains possible at all. Below 4,000 meters, we cross a threshold into something fundamentally different. This is the abyssopelagic zone, the abyss, and the word carries weight that statistics alone cannot convey. The pressure here exceeds 400 times what you experience at sea level. If you could somehow descend to this depth in an unprotected human body, the pressure wouldn't crush you slowly or give you time to feel pain. Your body would compress before your nervous system could register what was happening, before thought could form, before you could understand that anything was wrong. Styrofoam cups, tied to research equipment and sent to these depths, return the size of thimbles. Their structure collapsed at the molecular level. Yet creatures here live their entire lives as if this crushing force doesn't exist at all. The temperature has dropped to just above freezing, hovering between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius, and unlike the surface ocean, with its seasonal variations and daily fluctuations, this temperature remains essentially constant. It has been this cold for millions of years, perhaps tens of millions, creating an environment more thermally stable than anywhere on land. Time moves differently here, measured not in days or seasons, but in epochs. What's remarkable isn't that the abyss is extreme, it's that the abyss is vast. The abyssal plains represent the largest habitat on Earth, covering more than half the planet's surface, a greater area than all continents combined, larger than all forests, grasslands, and deserts in the world above. Yet we've explored only the tiniest fraction of this immense realm. More humans have walked on the moon than have visited the abyssal plains directly. More detailed maps exist of Mars than of the ocean floor beneath us. If you could somehow stand on these plains, and ignoring the impossibility of that for a moment, you would see an environment that resembles a desert more than anything else. Flat expanses stretch in every direction, broken occasionally by gentle hills or depressions, but mostly just continuing endlessly toward horizons you couldn't see in the absolute darkness. The ground beneath would be soft, fine sediment that has accumulated over millions of years, layer upon patient layer. This isn't sand in the conventional sense. It's the remains of countless organisms that lived and died in the waters above microscopic shells, fragments of bone and scale, particles of organic matter that drifted down through thousands of meters of water column in a process that takes weeks or months. Scientists call this marine snow. It falls constantly, a gentle, unending precipitation of death from the sunlit world above. Individual particles are so small they sink at rates measured in meters per day, tumbling slowly through the darkness, consumed and reconsumed by creatures at each depth, arriving at the bottom, stripped of most nutritional value, but still representing the primary source of food for abyssal life. The sediment that carpets the plains is essentially the accumulated marine snow of millennia, compacted under its own weight into a substrate that records the history of everything that has lived and died in the ocean above. Life here is sparse, in a way that's difficult to comprehend. In the zones above, life clusters and swarms. Down here, creatures are separated by distances that might be measured in hundreds of meters or more. Food arrives so rarely and in such small quantities that survival requires extraordinary efficiency. There's no room for waste, no energy for unnecessary movement. Every calorie must be preserved. The tripod fish embodies this principle with elegant simplicity. It stands on the abyssal plain, on 3 elongated fin rays, 2 pelvic fins, and 1 caudal fin that elevate its body above the sediment like a camera tripod. Its pectoral fins extend forward and upward, covered in sensory cells that detect chemical traces and vibrations. The fish faces into the current and simply waits, sometimes for hours without moving, sensing for any particle of food drifting by in the slow bottom currents. When something edible approaches, the fish strikes with minimal movement, capturing the particle and returning immediately to stillness. This strategy, standing and waiting rather than swimming and searching, conserves energy in an environment where the next meal might not arrive for days. Everything about the abyss suggests patience taken to an extreme. This is a world where evolutionary strategies are measured not in generations, but in millions of years, where individual organisms might live for decades or centuries, where the fundamental rule is simple: wait, conserve, survive. In the abyssal desert, food arrives from above in 2 very different forms. The first is constant but meager marine snow, an endless gentle precipitation of organic particles drifting down through thousands of meters of darkness. The second is rare but transformative, the fall of a whale carcass, an event so significant it can sustain entire communities for decades. Marine snow begins its journey at the surface, where sunlight drives the productivity that the deep depends on. Dead phytoplankton, zooplankton fecal pellets, discarded mucus feeding structures, fragments of larger organisms, all these particles begin sinking the moment they form. The descent is slow beyond measure. A particle might fall only 10 or 20 meters per day, tumbling gently through the water column, taking weeks or months to reach the abyssal floor. And during that long fall, the particle is consumed over and over. A copepod eats it and excretes a new pellet. A jellyfish filters it. Bacteria colonize it and break it down further. By the time marine snow finally settles on the abyssal plains, it's been processed through multiple digestive systems, stripped of most nutritional value, reduced to the faintest shadow of what it once contained. Yet this depleted snow is what sustains most abyssal life. It drifts down continuously, accumulating in slight depressions, collecting along the paths of bottom currents. Creatures have evolved to extract nutrition from materials so poor in energy that surface organisms would starve trying to metabolize it. Sea cucumbers plow through the sediment like living vacuum cleaners, ingesting vast quantities of mud to extract the tiny amount of organic matter it contains. Bacteria process what multicellular life cannot. Nothing is wasted, because nothing can be wasted. The marine snow that falls today will be consumed, excreted, recolonized by bacteria, and consumed again in cycles that might continue for years before the last usable calorie is finally extracted. But occasionally, perhaps once every few decades in any given square kilometer, something else arrives from above. When a whale dies and sinks to the abyss, it creates an island of life that can support unique communities for 50 years or more. A grey whale carcass might weigh 50 tons, representing more organic matter than falls as marine snow in that location over several years. It's Christmas in the desert, a windfall so significant it restructures the entire local ecosystem. The feast begins within hours. Sleeper sharks, drawn by chemical traces spreading through the water, arrive first and tear into the soft tissues with triangular teeth. Hagfish, primitive eel-like creatures that have remained essentially unchanged for 300 million years, burrow directly into the carcass through any available opening. These strange animals are living fossils, lacking jaws and possessing a skull made of cartilage rather than bone. When threatened or when they need leverage to tear flesh, hagfish tie their own bodies into knots, using the knot as an anchor point to pull away chunks of meat. They also produce slime in quantities that seem impossible from such a small body. A single hagfish, when stressed, can turn a bucket of water into thick gel within minutes. This slime clogs the gills of would-be predators and may serve as defense or simply as a byproduct of their unique biology. Within weeks, the soft tissues are consumed entirely. Now the second stage begins. Bone-eating worms called Osedax zombie worms colonize the skeleton. These worms have no mouth, no stomach, no digestive system in any conventional sense. Instead, they extend root-like structures into the bone itself, secreting acid that dissolves the mineral matrix and allows them to access the lipids stored inside. They can't digest these fats themselves, so they host bacteria in specialized tissues, and the bacteria do the metabolizing, providing nutrients back to the worm. A single whale bone might support hundreds of these worms, gardens of them, their red plumes extending into the water while their roots dissolve the skeleton from within. This phase can last for years or even decades. Eventually, even the bones are consumed, dissolved, and metabolized to the point where only fragments remain. But these fragments, and the bare mineral skeleton left behind, serve one final purpose. In the soft sediment of the abyssal plain, hard surfaces are extraordinarily rare. The whale's remaining bones become substrate attachment points for corals, anemones, sponges, organisms that require something solid to anchor themselves. A reef community develops around the bones, creating habitat complexity in the middle of flat emptiness. Some of the organisms that colonize whale falls exist nowhere else. They've evolved to specialize in these rare but predictable resources, moving from one carcass to another across the abyssal plains, finding new falls through chemical sensing, maintaining populations that depend entirely on the death of giants. Yet even whale falls, remarkable as they are, represent food from the surface energy that originated with photosynthesis, with the sun. But some abyssal creatures have discovered something else entirely, a source of energy that comes not from above, but from below, from the earth itself. Not all abyssal creatures stand and wait like the tripod fish. Some are travelers, moving slowly and deliberately across plains that stretch for thousands of miles, following signals we can't detect toward destinations we don't understand. These are the rovers of the deep, creatures whose survival strategy involves covering vast distances in search of the scattered resources that sustain life in this underwater desert. The Dumbo octopus moves through the abyss with a grace that seems out of place in such a harsh environment. Named for the ear-like fins that extend from the sides of its bell-shaped body, it propels itself by flapping these appendages in slow, rhythmic pulses not swimming in any conventional sense, but rather flying through the water like some translucent ghost. Its body is gelatinous, almost transparent, with internal organs visible through skin that offers no resistance to the crushing pressure surrounding it. These octopuses have been observed at depths exceeding 7,000 meters, making them among the deepest living octopuses known to science. Creatures that spend their entire lives in conditions that would destroy most complex organisms instantly. They hunt by hovering above the sediment, watching with eyes adapted to near total darkness for any movement below. When they detect a worm or small crustacean, they pounce, dropping suddenly and spreading their webbed arms like a parachute to trap prey against the seafloor. It's a patient hunting style that matches the slow pace of abyssal life. Female Dumbo octopuses carry eggs at multiple stages of development simultaneously, releasing young gradually over time rather than in a single spawning event. This strategy hedges against the unpredictability of food availability if conditions are poor. When some eggs hatch, others remain undeveloped, waiting for better circumstances that might not arrive for months. Perhaps even stranger are the sea pigs, a type of sea cucumber that has abandoned the typical sea cucumber strategy of lying motionless and has instead taken up walking. They move across the abyssal plain on elongated tube feet, hydraulic appendages that extend from their undersides like legs, giving them an appearance that's almost comical. Pink and plump, they look like ambulatory sausages, waddling slowly through the sediment with their feeding tentacles extended, ingesting organic particles and extracting whatever nutrition remains in the depleted marine snow. What's particularly puzzling is their social behavior. Sea pigs often aggregate in groups, sometimes forming herds of hundreds of individuals moving roughly in the same direction across the seafloor. Camera deployments have captured these gatherings repeatedly, but scientists still don't fully understand why they occur. Are the sea pigs following chemical gradients toward areas of higher food concentration? Are they aggregating for reproductive purposes? Or is something else, some environmental cue we can't measure, drawing them together? The question remains open, a reminder that even creatures we can observe and document retain fundamental mysteries about their behavior and motivations. Sea cucumbers in general possess one of the more remarkable defense mechanisms in the deep ocean. When threatened by predators, many species can expel their internal organs, stomach, intestines, respiratory structures through their anus, or, in some species, through ruptures in their body wall. These expelled organs are sticky and sometimes toxic, distracting or entangling the predator, while the sea cucumber escapes with what remains of its body. Over the following weeks, the sea cucumber regenerates everything it lost. This isn't healing in the conventional sense, it's complete reconstruction of complex organs from scratch, a biological capability that seems almost like science fiction, but serves a practical purpose in an environment where encounters with predators are rare enough that sacrificing months to regeneration is worth the cost of survival. These travelers move through the abyss, following patterns we're only beginning to document. Some appear to be following food sources, aggregating where marine snow accumulates or where a recent food fall has occurred. But others seem to be moving towards something else entirely. In certain areas, cameras have captured sea pigs and other mobile organisms clustered in densities far higher than the surrounding plains, and measurements show the water in these areas is measurably warmer, carrying chemical signatures of volcanic activity. These creatures are moving towards something that shouldn't exist in the deep ocean, toward heat, toward chemistry, toward places where the Earth itself provides energy that has nothing to do with the sun. They're heading toward one of the most revolutionary discoveries in the history of deep-sea biology, toward ecosystems that force science to rewrite its understanding of where and how life can exist. In February 1977, a small submersible called Alvin descended to the seafloor near the Galapagos Rift, carrying 3 scientists into darkness 2,000 meters below the surface. They expected to find what everyone expected to find on the abyssal plain: sparse life, cold sediment, perhaps a few sea cucumbers, or tripod fish scattered across an otherwise barren landscape. What they discovered instead was so extraordinary, so completely unexpected, that it forced biology to rewrite some of its most fundamental assumptions about life itself. Through the submersible's small portholes, the scientists saw chimneys, tall mineral structures rising from cracks in the seafloor, spewing water that shimmered with heat, superheated to temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, yet contained under such pressure it couldn't boil. And surrounding these vents, clustered so densely they obscured the rocks beneath them, was life. Giant white clams the size of dinner plates, clusters of pale shrimp swarming over the chimney surfaces, and most striking of all, tube worms, towering organisms up to 8 feet long, their bright red plumes swaying in the current like some alien garden growing from the rocks. This wasn't sparse abyssal life eking out existence on marine snow. This was abundance, diversity, biomass, concentrated in densities comparable to tropical rainforests. In one of the most hostile environments imaginable, darkness, crushing pressure, water laden with toxic chemicals, life was thriving in ways that seemed to violate everything science understood about how ecosystems function. The discovery's significance went far beyond simply finding new species. Until that moment, every known ecosystem on Earth, no matter how remote or unusual, ultimately derived its energy from the same source, the sun. Plants and algae captured sunlight through photosynthesis, converting it into chemical energy that flowed through food chains to herbivores, predators, and decomposers. Even the abyssal plains, dark and distant from the surface, depended on marine snow, the rain of dead organisms that had lived in sunlit waters above. The sun was the engine that drove all life on Earth. This wasn't just accepted science, it was considered a fundamental requirement, as basic as the need for water or carbon. But the ecosystems around hydrothermal vents operated on completely different principles. The bacteria here didn't use photosynthesis. They used chemosynthesis, a process where chemical energy, rather than light energy, drives the formation of organic compounds. These bacteria metabolize hydrogen sulfide, a compound that spews from the vents and is toxic to most life, combining it with oxygen to produce energy. They're essentially eating chemicals from Earth's interior, capturing energy from geological processes rather than from the sun. And all the other organisms at the vents, the clams, the shrimp, the tube worms, depend on these chemosynthetic bacteria, either eating them directly or, in many cases, hosting them inside their own bodies, in symbiotic relationships. This discovery didn't just add new species to the catalogue of known life. It demonstrated that life could exist without any connection to photosynthesis whatsoever, that entire complex ecosystems could be fueled by chemistry alone. The implications rippled through biology, geology, and astrobiology. If life on Earth could thrive without sunlight, sustained by chemical energy from planetary interiors, then similar life might exist in places previously considered impossible. The ice-covered moons of Jupiter and Saturn, Europa, and Enceladus, where thick ice shells prevent any sunlight from reaching suspected subsurface oceans, suddenly became viable candidates for harboring life. Hydrothermal activity might exist on those distant ocean floors, and if it does, the discovery at the Galapagos Rift suggests life could be there too. The vents themselves form along mid-ocean ridges, the underwater mountain ranges, where tectonic plates pull apart and new oceanic crust is born. Cold seawater seeps down through cracks in the seafloor, penetrating deep into the crust where it encounters magma chambers. The water superheats, dissolves minerals from the surrounding rock sulfides, metals, other compounds, and then shoots back up through chimney-like structures, driven by its own heat and the pressure of more cold water sinking behind it. As this mineral-laden water meets the near-freezing ocean, the dissolved compounds precipitate out, building the chimneys taller over time, sometimes creating towers 3 or 4 stories high. Black smokers spew dark, particle-rich water, heavy with iron sulfides and other metals that give the plumes their characteristic color. White smokers emit lighter minerals, barium, calcium, silicon, at lower temperatures, creating pale, ghostly plumes. Both types support life, though the communities differ based on temperature and chemistry. These structures grow continuously, layer upon layer of precipitated minerals, building upward until they collapse under their own weight. or until the volcanic activity that feeds them shifts elsewhere. Around these vents, in water that should be sterile and lifeless, evolution has created complexity that rivals anything in the sunlit world. Beginning with organisms so strange, they seem designed to prove that life's creativity has no limits. The giant tube worm, Riftia pachyptilla, stands as perhaps the most striking organism at hydrothermal vents, tall white tubes rising from the rocks, topped with brilliant red plumes that wave in the currents like alien flowers blooming in the deep. These creatures can grow to 8 feet long with no mouth, no stomach, no digestive system whatsoever. Yet they're among the fastest growing animals in the deep ocean, capable of adding several feet of length in just a few years. They thrive on chemistry alone, and understanding how requires examining one of nature's most elegant symbiotic partnerships. The red plumes that crown each tube worm contain hemoglobin, the same oxygen-carrying molecule that colors human blood. But tube worm hemoglobin performs a task that would be impossible in most organisms. It must simultaneously carry both oxygen and hydrogen sulfide, two chemicals that normally react violently when combined, producing heat and sometimes flames in terrestrial environments. Yet in vent water, both are dissolved and present together, and the tube worm needs both. Oxygen comes from seawater that mixes with the vent flow. Hydrogen sulfide pours directly from the Earth's crust. The tube worm's specialized hemoglobin can bind both chemicals without allowing them to react, keeping them separated at the molecular level while transporting them through the worm's body to where they're needed. That destination is an organ called the trophosome, which fills most of the tube worm's internal volume. The trophosome isn't a stomach or liver or any organ you'd recognize from conventional biology. It's something else entirely, a dense mass of tissue packed with billions of bacteria. These aren't parasites or infections. They're partners, chemosynthetic bacteria that perform the fundamental work of keeping the tube worm alive. When the hemoglobin delivers oxygen and hydrogen sulfide to the trophosome, the bacteria use these chemicals to drive reactions that generate energy, much like mitochondria. In our own cells burn sugar with oxygen. But instead of sugar, these bacteria metabolize sulfide poison to most life, fuel for them. The energy produced allows the bacteria to synthesize organic compounds from carbon dioxide dissolved in the water, building sugars and proteins and fats from raw inorganic materials. These organic compounds feed the tube worm, providing all the nutrition it needs to grow and maintain its body. The tube worm, in return, provides its bacterial partners with everything they require: a safe, stable home inside its tissues, a constant supply of hydrogen sulfide and oxygen delivered directly to them, removal of waste products. It's cooperation at such a fundamental level that the boundaries between the two organisms blur. The tube worm cannot survive without its bacteria. The bacteria, in their specialized vent-adapted form, cannot survive without the tube worm. They've become a single functional unit, a merger between animal and microbe that has existed long enough to become seamless. But here's what makes this relationship truly extraordinary. Tube worms aren't born with their bacterial partners. Juvenile tube worms hatch from eggs with a mouth, a simple digestive tract, the basic anatomy of a conventional larva. They drift in the water above the vents for days or weeks, developing, preparing for the transformation that will define the rest of their lives. During this period, they must acquire their bacterial symbionts from the environment, filtering specific strains of chemosynthetic bacteria from the water around the vents and allowing them to colonize tissues that will eventually become the trophosome. Once the bacteria are established, something remarkable happens. The tube worm's mouth seals shut. Its digestive system, now unnecessary, is reabsorbed into surrounding tissues. The trophosome expands, filling the space where stomach and intestines would normally reside. The worm secretes the white tube around itself and settles permanently onto rock, anchoring itself near a vent where chemistry is right and chemicals are abundant. From this moment forward, for the rest of its life, which may span decades, the tube worm will never eat, never digest food in any conventional sense. It has transformed itself into a living home for bacteria, trusting completely in the partnership it established as a larva. This trust is absolute and irreversible. A tube worm separated from its bacteria would starve despite being surrounded by nutrients it could theoretically use, because it has deliberately eliminated the structures that would allow it to process those nutrients independently. It has chosen symbiosis so completely that independence is no longer possible. Yet, this apparently risky strategy works spectacularly well. Tube worms grow faster than almost any other deep-sea invertebrate, adding length at rates that seem impossible for creatures living in such an extreme environment. They achieve this growth through pure chemistry, through bacterial partners that harvest energy from the earth itself, making the tube worms pioneers of an ecosystem built not on sunlight, but on stone and fire and water transformed by heat. Tube worms are just the beginning. Around these vents, life exists at densities 10,000 times greater than the surrounding abyssal plains. Entire communities that have evolved to exploit this chemical oasis, each species developing its own strategy for partnering with the bacteria that form the foundation of vent ecosystems. The approaches vary wildly, creating a showcase of evolution's creativity when presented with the same fundamental challenge: how to harvest energy from Earth's chemistry. The Yeti crab, discovered only in 2005 near vents in the South Pacific, takes perhaps the most visible approach to bacterial farming. Its most striking feature is immediately apparent arms, covered in dense mats of filamentous bacteria that give the appearance of white fur, hence the name that links it to the legendary mountain creature. But this isn't decoration or infection, it's agriculture. The crab waves its bacteria-covered arms in the vent water, exposing the bacterial colonies to the hydrogen sulfide and other chemicals they need to grow. Then, periodically, the crab scrapes bacteria off its own arms with specialized mouthparts and eats them, harvesting its crop. The crab must position itself with precision, close enough to the vent that bacterial growth is rapid, but far enough that the temperature doesn't cook its tissues. Too close means death by heat. Too far means the bacteria starve and provide insufficient food. The Yeti crab lives in this narrow margin, constantly adjusting position as vent output fluctuates, farming bacteria on its own body in a relationship that blurs the line between tool use and symbiosis. Vent shrimp employ a different strategy entirely. They cluster around certain vents by the hundreds or thousands, creating writhing carpets of pale bodies that cover every surface near the hottest water. These shrimp host their bacterial partners internally, in modified gill chambers that have evolved into bacterial farms. Instead of using gills primarily for respiration, the shrimp dedicate this space to cultivating chemosynthetic bacteria, then digest portions of the bacterial colony for nutrition, while maintaining enough bacteria to continue the culture. Some species have evolved even more remarkable adaptations, specialized light-sensing organs on their backs, positioned where eyes would never normally appear. These organs don't see in any conventional sense, but they can detect the faint thermal radiation emitted by superheated vent water. Water at 400 degrees Celsius glows, though too dimly for human eyes to perceive. The shrimp's back-mounted sensors allow them to navigate toward optimal temperatures without getting close enough to cook, using the vent's own heat as a beacon. Vent clams and mussels grow to sizes that would be impossible in the food-poor abyssal plains, some reaching diameters of a foot or more. They too harbor chemosynthetic bacteria, but in their gills, tissues that in shallow water relatives serve purely for respiration have been modified to house bacterial colonies. The clams position themselves where vent water mixes with oxygenated seawater, extending their siphons to draw in the chemical mixture their bacteria need. Some individuals may remain in the same spot for decades, growing slowly but continuously, their shells recording the history of vent activity in growth rings that show periods of abundance and scarcity. What's remarkable isn't just that all these organisms use bacteria, it's that each has independently evolved completely different approaches to the same basic strategy: external farming versus internal hosting, specialized organs versus modified gills, mobile harvesting versus stationary filtering. It's convergent evolution in reverse different solutions to the same problem, creating diversity from similarity. Each species has found its own way to exploit the bounty that chemosynthetic bacteria provide, and in doing so, they've created complexity that rivals shallow water coral reefs. The abundance at vents attracts visitors too. Octopuses from the surrounding abyssal plains sometimes lay their eggs on rocks near vents, taking advantage of the warmer water to speed embryonic development. What might take years in the cold abyss can happen in months near a vent. Fish that aren't specially adapted to vent chemistry still hunt here, drawn by the concentration of prey organisms, darting in to snatch shrimp or small crustaceans before retreating to cooler water. The vents become beacons in the desert, drawing life from the emptiness around them, creating oases where creatures can feed, reproduce, and thrive in ways the abyssal plains would never allow. But these oases aren't permanent. Vents are geological phenomena dependent on volcanic activity that shifts and changes over time. A vent that has supported a thriving community for decades might suddenly go cold as magma chambers move or tectonic activity changes. When that happens, the community faces a crisis: adapt, migrate, or die. And this impermanence raises a fascinating question. How do vent organisms find new vents when their home dies? How do populations separated by hundreds of miles of abyssal desert maintain genetic connection? The answer reveals that vent communities, for all their isolation, are connected across vast distances in ways we're only beginning to map. Beyond 6,000 meters, we enter the Hadal Zone, named for Hades, the Greek underworld, a realm where even the abyss seems shallow by comparison. These are the ocean trenches, the deepest places on Earth, formed where tectonic plates collide and one is forced beneath the other in a process called subduction. The descending plate creates long, narrow depressions in the seafloor, gouges in the Earth's surface that plunge to depths that challenge comprehension. The Mariana Trench, deepest of them all, reaches nearly 11,000 meters at its lowest point, a place called Challenger Deep. The pressure there exceeds 1,000 times what you experience standing at sea level, roughly equivalent to having 50 jumbo jets stacked on your thumbnail, or 1,000 elephants balanced on a postage stamp. These aren't just numbers meant to impress. They represent conditions so extreme they alter the fundamental properties of matter. Water itself becomes measurably denser under such pressure, compressed beyond its normal state. Materials that seem solid and reliable at the surface, metals, plastics, ceramics, behave differently down here, compressing and deforming in ways engineers must account for when designing vehicles capable of reaching these depths. The chemistry of seawater changes. Gases dissolve differently. Proteins fold into different configurations. Life attempting to exist here must solve problems that don't exist anywhere else on the planet. Only a handful of crude vehicles have ever reached the deepest trenches. In 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh descended to Challenger, deep in the bathyscaphe, Trieste, spending 20 minutes on the bottom before ascending a journey that proved human technology could reach these depths but revealed little about what actually lived there. It would be 52 years before another crewed vehicle returned. In 2012, filmmaker James Cameron made a solo dive in the submersible deep-sea Challenger, equipped with cameras and sampling equipment that provided our first detailed look at the Hadal world. What he saw resembled a snowfield more than an ocean floor. Fine sediment, pale and soft, stretched in all directions under the submersible's lights, creating a landscape that looked almost lunar in its desolation. The water itself appeared remarkably clear, not because it's clean in any conventional sense, but because so few particles remain suspended under such pressure. Everything settles, creating a clarity that allows light to travel farther than in shallower waters, illuminating a world that exists in conditions that should, by most reasonable assumptions, preclude complex life entirely. Yet life persists. Small amphipods, shrimp-like crustaceans moved across the sediment, visible in the submersible's lights. Sea cucumbers lay on the bottom, their bodies adapted to pressure that would crush most organisms instantly. These creatures live here as comfortably as birds live in air, experiencing the crushing force as normal, their cellular chemistry and body structure calibrated to conditions we can barely simulate in laboratories. The pressure that would compress your body before your neurons could fire a signal of distress is, to them, simply home. The existence of life in trenches forces a profound question. If organisms can adapt to the most extreme environment, Earth offers a place where pressure crushes, where temperature hovers just above freezing, where food is scarcer than almost anywhere else, where darkness is absolute and has been for billions of years. Then what does that tell us about life's potential elsewhere? If chemistry can solve the problems posed by the Hadal Zone, what problems can't it solve? The trenches become more than just geographic features. They become test cases for the limits of biology, demonstrations that life's requirements may be far more flexible than we imagine. Every trench dive reveals organisms no one has seen before, behaviors no one has documented, adaptations that challenge assumptions about what's possible. We've sent more people into space than have visited the Hadal Zone. We've mapped Mars in greater detail than the trenches of our own planet. These places represent the last true wilderness on Earth. Not because they're distant or hard to reach, though they are both, but because they exist in conditions so extreme that observation itself requires technology at the limits of what we can build. The trenches are alien worlds beneath our feet, closer than the space station, but vastly more difficult to access, harboring forms of life that survive what nothing should survive, raising questions about existence that ripple outward to the stars. The creatures that inhabit Hadal trenches have evolved solutions to pressure that seem to defy physics, adaptations so extreme they make the organisms themselves appear alien. The Mariana snailfish, discovered in 2014 and filmed at a depth of 8,178 meters, holds the record as the deepest fish ever documented. Watching footage of these fish is an unsettling experience. They're almost translucent, their bodies so gelatinous they seem barely solid, with internal organs visible through skin that looks more like membrane than tissue. They have no scales whatsoever, nothing rigid that might crack or compress under pressure. Their skeletons are cartilage rather than bone, flexible rather than brittle, allowing them to withstand forces that would shatter conventional skeletal structures. But the real adaptations occur at the molecular level, in solutions invisible to any camera. The cells of Hadal fish are filled with organic molecules, called piezolites, compounds that stabilize proteins under extreme pressure. Pressure doesn't just compress tissue, it fundamentally alters the shape of protein molecules, denaturing them the way heat denatures an egg white, causing them to lose function. Piezolites counteract this effect, surrounding proteins and maintaining their three-dimensional structure even when crushed by the weight of kilometers of water above. It's chemistry solving a physics problem, evolution finding molecular answers to environmental challenges that would seem insurmountable. The snailfish themselves appear ghostly in the footage captured by deep-sea cameras, pale, almost luminous, with bulbous heads dominated by small black eyes that seem almost unnecessary in the absolute darkness. Yet these fish hunt actively, feeding on amphipods and other small crustaceans that share their extreme environment. They swim with undulating movements that look slow and dreamlike, conserving energy in a place where every calorie matters, where the next meal might not arrive for days or weeks. Those amphipods, Hadal amphipods, represent some of the trench's most successful inhabitants. In shallow water, amphipods are typically small, rarely exceeding an inch or two in length. But in the trenches, some species have evolved into supergiants, growing to over a foot long, their bodies armored with thick exoskeletons and powered by muscular legs that propel them across the sediment with surprising speed. When researchers deploy baited cameras in trenches, lowering fish carcasses or other organic material, and filming what arrives, the amphipods appear within hours. Sometimes in such numbers, they create writhing masses that completely obscure the bait. A fish carcass that might take days or weeks to be consumed on the abyssal plains can be reduced to bare bones in hours by swarms of these scavengers. Their abundance challenges earlier assumptions that Hadal zones would be nearly lifeless. Food is scarce here, arriving primarily as occasional carrion that drifts down from shallower depths or as the sparse marine snow that reaches the bottom, depleted of most nutrition. Yet, when food does arrive, the response is immediate and overwhelming, suggesting populations far denser than scientists initially expected. These amphipods have evolved their own molecular adaptations to pressure-specialized proteins and cellular chemistry that allow them to function at depths where most organisms would simply cease to work at the molecular level. Sea cucumbers plow across the trench floors, ingesting sediment and processing it through digestive systems that extract whatever trace organic material remains. They're Hadal recyclers, ensuring that even the most depleted marine snow eventually yields its last calories to the ecosystem. Some species appear to be endemic to specific trenches found in the Mariana Trench but nowhere else, or unique to the Tonga Trench or the Kermadec Trench. Scientists believe there may be species living in ocean trenches that are more isolated from the rest of Earth's life than we are from potential life on Mars. Evolutionary branches that have been separated for so long, under such unique conditions, that they've diverged into forms found nowhere else on the planet. Each trench may represent an isolated island of Hadal life, separated from other trenches by thousands of kilometers of shallower seafloor that trench-adapted organisms cannot cross. The pressure differential is too great a creature adapted to survive at 11,000 meters might be crushed by the relative lack of pressure at 6,000 meters, just as we would be crushed descending into their realm. This isolation creates the potential for unique evolutionary paths in each trench, separate experiments in how life can adapt to the most extreme conditions Earth offers. Yet, for all we've learned from camera deployments and the handful of submersible visits, our knowledge remains fragmentary. Most observations last only hours. A camera descends, films for a brief period, and ascends. We're seeing snapshots of ecosystems we don't understand, glimpses of behaviors we can't contextualize, organisms we can identify, but not study in any comprehensive way. And recently, those cameras have captured something else in the trenches, something that doesn't belong. Human materials in the deepest places on Earth, plastic and pollution in regions no human has ever visited directly, evidence that our reach extends even to places we've barely begun to explore. In the Hadal Zone, amid all the extreme adaptations and remarkable survival strategies, there exists an invisible barrier that no fish can cross. Scientists have calculated its depth with surprising precision, approximately 8,200 to 8,400 meters. Below this boundary, fish cannot exist, not because the pressure crushes them, but because the very chemistry they use to survive pressure becomes their poison. There's an invisible barrier in the ocean where fish cannot go, defined not by physical force, but by the limits of biochemistry itself. The boundary exists because of a single molecule, trimethylamine oxide, or TMAO. Fish use this compound to counteract pressure's effects on their proteins. As pressure increases, it tries to collapse and denature proteins, disrupting their function at the molecular level. TMAO works as a counteracting agent, a chemical buffer that stabilizes protein structure and prevents this pressure-induced denaturation. The deeper a fish lives, the more TMAO it needs in its cells to maintain protein function. This relationship is direct and predictable for every 1,000 meters of additional depth. Fish require higher TMAO concentrations, but TMAO itself is toxic at high concentrations. In large enough quantities, it disrupts cellular processes, interferes with metabolism, and eventually kills the very cells it's meant to protect. Fish living in the Hadal Zone walk a chemical tightrope. They need enough TMAO to stabilize their proteins under crushing pressure, but not so much that the TMAO itself becomes lethal. At around 8,400 meters, these two requirements become incompatible. A fish would need TMAO concentrations high enough to poison its own tissues just to keep its proteins functional. There's no way to balance the equation. The chemistry simply doesn't work. This prediction, made by researchers studying the biochemistry of deep-sea fish, has been confirmed by observation. The deepest fish ever recorded, the Mariana snailfish filmed at 8,178 meters, exists right at the theoretical limit. Despite extensive searching with cameras and traps, deployed deeper than 8,400 meters, no fish have ever been documented below this boundary. The limit appears to be absolute, a hard ceiling on vertebrate life imposed not by evolution's failure to find solutions, but by chemistry's fundamental constraints. What this means is profound. Below 8,400 meters, vertebrate life cannot exist. Any creatures living deeper must be invertebrates, organisms with different biochemistry that doesn't depend on the same protein-stabilizing mechanisms fish use. The amphipods swarming over bait in the deepest trenches, the sea cucumbers crawling across sediment at 11,000 meters, the worms and crustaceans that inhabit the absolute bottom. None of them are constrained by the same chemical limits as fish, because they've evolved different solutions to the pressure problem. The fish depth limit is an invisible wall, as real and impassable as if constructed from steel, yet existing only as a consequence of molecular interactions and toxic concentrations. A fish could be placed at 8,500 meters in a pressure-resistant container and still die not from the pressure itself, but from the impossible chemistry required to survive it. It's a boundary written into the periodic table, into the properties of organic molecules, into the fundamental constraints of carbon-based life operating under extreme conditions. This raises a natural question. If fish have an absolute depth limit, do invertebrates have one too? Could there be a depth where even the most adapted amphipod, the most pressure-resistant sea cucumber, simply cannot survive because the chemistry required to maintain life becomes impossible? Calculations suggest that life could theoretically exist even at the deepest point in the Mariana Trench, at nearly 11,000 meters, if organisms can evolve the right biochemical adaptations. But theory and reality don't always align. We won't know the true limits until we explore more thoroughly, until we've sampled every trench at every depth and documented what lives where. The Hadal Zone may contain deeper boundaries. We haven't yet discovered invisible walls at 9,000 meters, or 10,000, or deeper still, where life finally surrenders to pressure, not because evolution couldn't find solutions, but because chemistry offers no solutions to find. These questions remain open, mysteries written in the deepest water on Earth, waiting for exploration that has barely begun. But perhaps the more important question isn't how deep life can go, but how all these depths connect, how the surface world and the Hadal trenches, separated by 10 kilometers of water and conditions so different they seem to belong to different planets, actually form a single integrated system where patterns and cycles link every layer into a functioning whole. The ocean doesn't just contain life, it moves it, cycling organisms and the carbon they contain through layers in a process so vast it shapes Earth's climate. Scientists call it the biological pump, but the name understates its significance. This is the ocean breathing, inhaling carbon dioxide at the surface and exhaling it into the deep, operating not on the timescale of seconds like our own breath, but over decades and centuries, moving carbon from atmosphere to abyss, where it can remain locked away for 1,000 years or more. The process begins at the surface, where sunlight penetrates and phytoplankton bloom. These microscopic organisms, single-celled algae, cyanobacteria, diatoms, perform photosynthesis, just like plants on land, capturing carbon dioxide dissolved in seawater and using solar energy to convert it into organic compounds that form their bodies. They're extraordinarily efficient at this. Despite being individually invisible to the naked eye, phytoplankton collectively capture roughly as much carbon dioxide as all terrestrial plants combined, making the ocean's surface one of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. But phytoplankton don't live long. Most species have lifespans measured in days or weeks. When they die, or when they're eaten by zooplankton and excreted as fecal pellets, they begin sinking. This is where the pump engages, where carbon captured at the surface starts its long journey downward. A single particle of marine snow, perhaps a dead diatom, perhaps a copepod's fecal pellet, begins falling through the water column at a rate of tens of meters per day. The descent is slow, gentle, but inexorable. As it sinks, The particle passes through different ocean layers, each inhabited by creatures adapted to that specific depth. A small fish might eat it and excrete a new particle. Bacteria colonize it, breaking down complex organic molecules into simpler compounds. By the time the particle reaches 200 meters, much of its original carbon content has been consumed, respired back into the water as dissolved carbon dioxide. But what remains continues sinking. At 500 meters, it's consumed and re-excreted again. At 1,000 meters, bacteria have processed it further. Each depth extracts a little more energy, a little more nutrition, until what finally reaches the seafloor is depleted almost beyond recognition. But it's still carbon, still organic matter, still part of the continuous rain that feeds the deep. This process moves carbon on a scale difficult to comprehend. Every year, billions of tons of carbon captured at the surface sink into the deep ocean through the biological pump. Some of this carbon is respired back into the water column fairly quickly, but a significant fraction reaches depths below 1,000 meters, where it can remain isolated from the atmosphere for centuries. Water at these depths doesn't mix rapidly with surface water. It's part of the thermohaline circulation that operates on timescales of 1,000 years or more. Carbon that sinks into the deep ocean effectively disappears from the atmospheric system for longer than recorded human history. The seafloor itself becomes a library of carbon, with sediments recording millions of years of this continuous rain. Layers upon layers of accumulated marine snow compress into ooze, then into sedimentary rock, locking carbon away for geological timescales. Core samples taken from the seafloor can be read like tree rings, revealing periods of high and low biological productivity, documenting ice ages and warm periods through the carbon signatures left by ancient phytoplankton blooms. For millions of years, this pump has helped regulate Earth's climate, acting as a massive buffer that prevents carbon dioxide from accumulating too rapidly in the atmosphere. When atmospheric carbon dioxide rises, phytoplankton can grow more productively, capturing more carbon and sinking more of it to depth. When carbon dioxide falls, the pump slows. It's a negative feedback system, self-regulating to some degree, maintaining a balance that has kept Earth's climate within ranges where life can flourish. But the pump's efficiency isn't guaranteed. Ocean acidification caused by the ocean absorbing increasing amounts of carbon dioxide from human activities is beginning to affect the organisms that drive the pump. Some phytoplankton species may struggle to build their shells in more acidic water. Zooplankton may produce fecal pellets that sink more slowly or break apart more easily. Warming surface waters are becoming more stratified, mixing less with deeper layers, potentially reducing nutrient supply to the surface and limiting phytoplankton growth. These changes could weaken the pump, reducing its ability to move carbon into the deep just when we need it most. Yet even as the pump potentially weakens, other movements continue, including migrations that seem to defy the one-way flow of carbon from surface to depth. Creatures that travel upward every night in journeys that connect all ocean layers in ways the biological pump cannot. Every night, as the sun sets on the ocean surface, something extraordinary begins. In waters around the globe, from tropical seas to polar regions, billions of creatures start rising from the depths toward the surface. Zooplankton, no larger than grains of rice, jellyfish trailing translucent tentacles, squid with bodies the size of fingers, small fish by the millions, all ascending through hundreds of meters of water, in a migration so massive it involves more individual organisms than there are people on Earth. This is the diel vertical migration, the largest daily movement of biomass on the planet, a hidden commute that happens in complete darkness, driven by hunger and fear in equal measure. The reason for this nightly journey is elegantly simple. Food and safety exist at different depths, so organisms travel between them. The surface waters, where sunlight drives photosynthesis, are rich with phytoplankton, the microscopic algae that form the base of most marine food chains. Zooplankton and small fish need to feed on these abundant resources. But the sunlit surface is also where visual predators, larger fish, seabirds, marine mammals hunt most effectively. During daylight, Being near the surface means being visible, and visibility means death. So these creatures have evolved a compromise. Feed at the surface under cover of darkness, then retreat to the safety of deeper, darker waters before dawn reveals them to predators. The migration happens with remarkable regularity and precision. As twilight fades, the upward movement begins, timed not by clocks, but by the changing light levels at depth. The ascending mass is so dense that it appears on sonar and echo sounder displays as a distinct layer, something naval operators during World War II detected and initially mistook for the seafloor itself. They called it the deep scattering layer, puzzled by how this apparent bottom seemed to rise toward the surface each evening and sink back down each morning. Only later did scientists realize they were detecting not geology, but biology, a living layer of creatures whose bodies reflect sound waves just as rock does. Not all organisms migrate the same distance. Some zooplankton rise only 200 or 300 meters, making relatively modest journeys. Others travel over 1,000 meters each way, ascending from the twilight zone to the surface and back again in a round trip that can cover more vertical distance than the height of the tallest mountains. This is one of the most energetically expensive behaviors in the ocean, burning calories to travel vast distances twice daily, yet the strategy persists because the alternative is worse. Staying near the surface means constant exposure to predators. Staying deep means starvation. There's a secondary effect to this migration that scientists only recently began to appreciate fully. It moves carbon. When organisms feed at the surface, they consume phytoplankton and smaller zooplankton, incorporating carbon into their bodies. When they descend to depth to spend the day, they digest, respire, and excrete in deeper waters, effectively transporting carbon from surface to depth. This active transport supplements the passive sinking of marine snow, adding another mechanism to the biological pump. Creatures that never intended to participate in climate regulation are nonetheless moving carbon between ocean layers on a scale that affects global cycles. The migration creates a living connection between surface and depth, a daily pulse that links ecosystems separated by hundreds of meters of water column. Predators, in the deep time, their own feeding, to coincide with the migrants' arrival. Bacteria at depth process the organic matter the migrants excrete. The entire ocean responds to this rhythm, adjusting to the twice-daily redistribution of biomass that has continued for millions of years. It's a spectacle that happens every night, in every ocean, yet remains largely invisible to human awareness. No tourists gather to watch it. No documentaries capture it in real time because it occurs in darkness, dispersed across vast volumes of water. But instruments detect it, scientists study it, and slowly we're recognizing that this hidden migration shapes ocean ecology and chemistry in ways that ripple through the entire marine system. Yet even this massive daily migration is dwarfed by the journeys some creatures undertake individuals that don't just rise and sink with the rhythm of day and night, but dive to depths that should kill air-breathing animals, staying submerged for hours while hunting in the deep, then returning to the surface in migrations that seem to violate the laws of mammalian physiology. The vertical migrations of zooplankton and fish, remarkable as they are, pale beside what some mammals accomplish. Elephant seals and Cuvier's beaked whales don't just visit the deep ocean, they live there, spending the vast majority of their lives in regions that should be inaccessible to air-breathing animals. Some seals spend less than 10% of their time at the surface, breathing air. The other 90% unfolds in the deep twilight zone, hunting in darkness at depths that would kill most mammals instantly. Elephant seals were thought to be surface animals until scientists attached tracking devices to them in the 1,980 seconds and discovered something astonishing. These seals barely spend any time at the surface at all. They dive continuously, descending to depths exceeding 2,000 meters and staying submerged for up to 2 hours before surfacing briefly, sometimes for only a few minutes to breathe, then diving again. During their months-long foraging migrations across open ocean, they maintain this pattern relentlessly. Dive, surface briefly, dive again, an endless cycle that continues day and night. The physiological adaptations that make this possible seem almost impossible. Elephant seals have collapsible lungs that compress completely under pressure, forcing air into rigid airways, where nitrogen cannot be absorbed into the bloodstream. This prevents the nitrogen narcosis and decompression sickness that would kill human divers attempting similar depths. Their blood volume is enormous relative to their body size, storing oxygen in quantities that would be toxic to most mammals. Their muscles are packed with myoglobin, an oxygen-binding protein similar to hemoglobin, but designed for storage rather than transport, turning the muscle tissue itself into an oxygen reservoir. During dives, their heart rate drops from over 100 beats per minute to as low as 3, and blood flow is redirected away from non-essential tissues, maintaining only the brain, heart, and critical organs. What are they doing down there? Hunting, constantly. The seals feed primarily on squid and fish in the mesopelagic zone, but in complete darkness, vision becomes nearly useless. Instead, they hunt by touch, using their whiskers long, stiff vibrissae, covered with nerve endings, sensitive enough to detect the subtle water disturbances created by swimming prey. A squid jetting through the water leaves a hydrodynamic signature that persists for seconds, and the seal's whiskers can read these traces like tracks in snow, following them to prey they cannot see. It's a hunting strategy that seems impossibly difficult, yet the seals are successful enough to spend months at sea, diving continuously, gaining weight despite the enormous energy cost of their lifestyle. But even elephant seals don't hold the mammalian dive record. That distinction belongs to Cuvier's beaked whales, which have been documented diving to nearly 3,000 meters and staying submerged for almost 4 hours. These whales are among the least understood large mammals on Earth. They spend so little time at the surface and live in such deep offshore waters that most of what we know about them comes from tags attached during rare encounters. The tags record depth, acceleration, and sometimes sound, allowing scientists to reconstruct what happens during dives they cannot directly observe. The data reveals whales hunting squid at depths where pressure exceeds 300 times atmospheric levels, using echolocation to navigate and locate prey in absolute darkness. The clicks they produce are powerful enough to stun squid, facilitating capture. But how these whales manage nitrogen at such depths remains partially mysterious. They must have physiological mechanisms for preventing nitrogen absorption or eliminating it rapidly, but the details are still being studied. What's clear is that they've evolved solutions to problems that human engineers struggle to address even with advanced technology. Why dive so deep? The answer appears to be opportunity. The mesopelagic zone contains vast quantities of squid and fish biomass, exceeding all commercial fisheries combined, that are relatively unexploited because so few predators can reach these depths. By evolving the ability to hunt there, marine mammals have gained access to a food supply their competitors cannot touch. They're exploiting a resource that exists in darkness, pressure, and cold that would kill most air-breathing animals, returning to the surface only long enough to exchange the breath that allows them to go back down. These animals create living connections between surface and deep, transporting not just themselves but energy and nutrients between realms that seem separate. Yet their individual journeys are part of something larger, physical processes that move water itself between depths, circulation patterns that link all ocean layers into a single planetary system, operating on timescales that dwarf the lives of any individual organism. The deep ocean doesn't just host life that has adapted to extreme conditions. It harbors organisms whose very metabolisms seem to violate the basic rules we thought governed all living things. Some creatures down here don't just adapt to their environment, they've evolved metabolisms so alien that they're essentially running on different operating systems than the rest of life on Earth, processing energy and nutrients through pathways that seem less like biology and more like alchemy. Consider the zombie worm, Osedax, which we encountered briefly at Whale Falls, but deserves deeper examination for its sheer metabolic impossibility. These worms have no mouth, no stomach, no anus, no digestive tract whatsoever. They're essentially tubes of tissue with root-like structures at one end and plumes at the other, and yet they feed, grow, and reproduce while embedded in the bones of dead whales lying on the seafloor. The mechanism they use borders on the grotesque. The worm's roots penetrate into bone tissue and secrete acid, dissolving the mineral matrix to access the lipids stored inside fats that whales accumulated during their lives and that remain locked in the skeleton long after soft tissues have been consumed. But Ozodiacs can't digest these lipids themselves. They lack the organs necessary for any conventional digestion. Instead, their root tissues are packed with bacteria, symbiotic microorganisms that can metabolize bone lipids, breaking them down and producing nutrients that the worm absorbs directly through its tissues. The worm is essentially a living, bone-dissolving factory run by bacterial workers, and this partnership is so complete that the worm's entire body plan has been reorganized around it. But the strangeness doesn't end there. Male Ozodiacs worms are microscopic thousands of times smaller than females, and they don't live independently at all. They live inside the females' bodies as parasites, sometimes dozens of them in a single female, existing solely to provide sperm. They're not even recognizable as worms in any conventional sense, just simplified sacs of reproductive tissue, their bodies reduced to the bare minimum necessary for fertilization. The barrel-eye fish presents a different kind of metabolic and anatomical impossibility. Its head is transparent, a dome of clear tissue filled with fluid, and suspended within this fluid are the fish's tubular eyes, pointing upward like binoculars aimed at the ceiling. The eyes can rotate within the fluid-filled dome, allowing the fish to look up to spot prey silhouettes against faint overhead light, then rotate forward to track prey as it approaches. The transparent dome protects these delicate eyes from the stinging cells of jellyfish, the barrel-eye's primary prey, while maintaining perfect optical clarity. It's an anatomy that seems designed by someone who didn't understand that heads should be opaque, that eyes should be fixed in position, that brains and optical organs should be protected by bone and scale, rather than exposed in a bubble of transparent tissue. Yet it works, and it works so well that barrel-eye fish thrive in the deep mesopelagic zone, where this bizarre configuration provides advantages more conventional anatomy could not. On the seafloor, where methane seeps from geological formations, bacteria have evolved to metabolize this simplest of hydrocarbons without oxygen. These methane oxidizing bacteria form thick mats, white, orange, or pink carpets, covering the sediment that look more like mineral deposits than living tissue. They represent ecosystems with no connection whatsoever to surface productivity, no dependence on marine snow or sunlight-derived energy. The methane they consume comes from deep geological sources, from the breakdown of ancient organic matter, or from chemical reactions in the Earth's crust. These bacterial mats support their own communities, worms, clams, and crustaceans that either eat the bacteria directly or host them symbiotically, creating oases of life powered entirely by chemistry leaking from below. Even more extreme are the organisms that have abandoned oxygen entirely. Deep in seafloor sediments, beneath meters of mud, where no oxygen penetrates, researchers have discovered functioning ecosystems in completely anoxic conditions. The organisms here use sulfate for respiration instead of oxygen, or metal ions, like iron and manganese, or other chemicals we don't normally associate with respiration at all. They're performing biochemistry that textbooks once taught was impossible, sustaining complex metabolisms without the electron acceptor that nearly all surface life depends on. These aren't bacteria surviving dormancy until oxygen returns. They're active, metabolizing, reproducing organisms that have never known oxygen and would likely be poisoned by it if exposed. Each of these discoveries forces biology to expand its definitions. Life doesn't require the metabolic pathways we thought were universal. It doesn't need the anatomical structures we assumed were fundamental. It can reorganize itself around partnerships with bacteria, can dissolve bone with acid, can see through transparent heads, can breathe chemicals we consider waste products or toxins. The deep ocean is teaching us that life's requirements are far more flexible than we imagined, that the operating systems supporting metabolism and survival can be rewritten in ways that seem impossible until we discover organisms already running them, thriving in conditions we thought would preclude existence. Solving problems through chemistry, we're only beginning to understand. In the vast darkness of the deep ocean, where individuals of the same species might be separated by miles of empty water, reproduction becomes one of the most significant challenges life faces. Finding food is difficult. Avoiding predators requires constant vigilance. But finding a mate, locating one specific individual of your own species in a three-dimensional space larger than continents, borders on impossible. The solutions evolution has produced are so extreme, they challenge our notions of what partnership, reproduction, and even identity mean. In the deep ocean, some males have evolved to give up everything, their freedom, their organs, even their individual identity, to permanently merge with a female, becoming nothing more than a living appendage that exists only to provide sperm. The anglerfish represents perhaps the most extreme example of this strategy. Male anglerfish are born as free-swimming larvae, but as they mature, their entire existence becomes focused on a single imperative: find a female before you die. They have disproportionately large eyes for detecting the faint bioluminescence a female might produce. Their olfactory organs are highly developed, capable of detecting chemical traces, pheromones released by females at incredible dilutions. And critically, adult males cannot eat. They have no functional digestive system. Their bodies are essentially swimming reproductive organs on a timer, burning through stored energy reserves while searching the darkness for the chemical signature that means salvation. When a male finally encounters a female, he doesn't court her. He bites onto her body, usually her belly or flank, and never releases. His jaw tissue begins to fuse with her skin at the cellular level. Their blood vessels merge, connecting their circulatory systems. Her blood begins supplying him with nutrients, keeping him alive. And then, gradually, his body begins to degenerate. His eyes, no longer needed, atrophy. His fins disappear. His internal organs, heart, most of his brain, everything except his reproductive system, shrink or vanish entirely. Over weeks or months, he transforms from an independent organism into a parasitic appendage, a living testis, permanently attached to the female's body. She controls when reproduction happens, releasing hormones into their shared bloodstream that trigger sperm production when she's ready to spawn. Some females carry multiple males. Researchers have found individuals with 6 or 7 males fused to their bodies, a bizarre harem of degenerated partners, providing genetic diversity. It's a reproductive strategy so extreme it seems like body horror, yet it solves the fundamental problem. In an environment where you might encounter a potential mate once in your entire life, the male ensures his genetic contribution by literally becoming part of the female, surrendering autonomy for the certainty of reproduction. Other deep-sea creatures have evolved different solutions to the same problem. Some squid species carry enormous spermatophores, sperm packets the size of a finger, and when they encounter another squid in the darkness, they simply attach the packet to whatever they've found. It might be the right species, might not, might be female, might be male. The strategy seems wasteful, but when encounters are rare enough, it makes statistical sense to attempt fertilization with everything you meet, rather than risk missing the one opportunity you might get. Male squid have been found with dozens of spermatophores attached to their bodies, failed attempts from other males. It's reproduction by saturation, throwing genetic material at every possible target in the hope that occasionally it lands somewhere viable. The vampire squid takes an opposite approach: extreme investment in very few offspring. Females produce only a small number of eggs, but each is large and energy-rich. She carries them with her as they develop, holding them delicately in her arms, aerating them by pumping water over them, protecting them from predators. The brooding period can last months, one of the longest known for any squid, during which the female must continue hunting and surviving while encumbered by her developing young. It's an enormous energy investment, but in an environment where most larvae would die before finding food, this intensive parental care increases the chances that at least some offspring will survive. Deep-sea octopuses take maternal investment even further. Some species lay their eggs on rocks near hydrothermal vents, where warmer water speeds embryonic development. Then they guard those eggs for years. The longest recorded brooding period is over 4.5 years, during which the female never leaves her eggs to hunt. She slowly starves, her body consuming itself to maintain enough energy to aerate the eggs and protect them from predators. By the time the young hatch, the mother is often near death or already dead, having sacrificed herself completely to give her offspring a chance at survival. These strategies aren't bizarre accidents. They're carefully evolved solutions to reproductive challenges, unique to the deep ocean, vast distances between individuals, food scarcity that makes producing many offspring impractical, and darkness that makes conventional courtship displays impossible. Each species has found its own answer to the question of how to pass genes to the next generation, when finding a mate is the hardest thing you'll ever do. In the deep ocean, where cold temperatures and scarce food slow every biological process, time operates on scales that seem almost geological. Many creatures here don't just live long lives. They live lives so extended that individual organisms span centuries, witnessing periods of history that dwarf entire human civilizations. Some sharks swimming in the deep ocean today were alive during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. They've been growing, slowly and patiently, through 4 centuries of human history in water that has barely changed, in darkness that has remained absolute since before humans learned to write. The Greenland shark holds the record as the longest-lived vertebrate known to science. These massive sharks, which can reach over 5 meters in length, inhabit the cold waters of the Arctic and North Atlantic, often at depths where temperatures hover just above freezing. Determining their age proved challenging until researchers developed a technique using radiocarbon dating of proteins in the eye lens tissues that form before birth and never regenerate, preserving a chemical signature of when the shark was born. The results were staggering. Some individuals are over 400 years old, with the largest specimens potentially reaching 500 years. A Greenland shark alive today might have been born in the early 1600s, before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. It was middle-aged when the American Revolution occurred, adult when the Civil War was fought, and is only now approaching old age in our current century. These sharks grow at rates measured in millimeters per year, perhaps a centimeter annually, and don't reach sexual maturity until they're over a century old. Their metabolism is extraordinarily slow, their movements lethargic even by deep-sea standards, their entire biology calibrated for extreme energy efficiency in an environment where food is scarce and temperatures are perpetually cold. This longevity isn't unique to sharks. The orange ruffy, a deep-sea fish that became a commercial target in the 1,970 seconds, was initially thought to have typical fish lifespans, perhaps 20 or 30 years. Fishing fleets harvested them heavily, assuming populations would replenish quickly like shallow water species. Only later did research reveal that orange ruffy can live over 200 years and don't reach reproductive maturity until they're in their 20s or 30s. The fishery was harvesting individuals that had been alive since before the American Revolution, removing them faster than centuries-slow reproduction could replace them. Populations collapsed, and the species remains depleted. Decades later, a case study in how assumptions based on shallow water biology fail catastrophically when applied to the deep. Even more extreme are the deep-sea corals and sponges that grow so slowly their ages must be measured in millennia. Some black coral colonies are estimated at over 4,000 years old. Certain glass sponges may exceed 10,000 years, making them among the oldest living organisms on Earth. They were already ancient when humans invented agriculture, were well established when the pyramids were built, have existed through the entire span of recorded human history. Their growth rings, like tree rings, but formed over vastly longer timescales, record changes in ocean chemistry and temperature archives of environmental conditions, stretching back thousands of years, preserved in the skeletons of organisms that are still alive and growing today. Why does the deep ocean favor such extreme longevity? The answer lies in energy economics. In food-poor environments, rapid growth and reproduction are wasteful. Better to grow slowly, conserving energy, reaching reproductive maturity late, but then reproducing repeatedly over centuries. A Greenland shark that lives 400 years might reproduce dozens of times, spreading reproductive effort across centuries and increasing the statistical likelihood that some offspring will survive to adulthood despite harsh conditions. Long lifespans also allow organisms to survive years or decades of food scarcity that would kill faster-living species. They simply wait, conserving energy until conditions improve. There's another intriguing aspect to deep-sea longevity. Many of these organisms show negligible senescence, meaning they don't appear to age in the traditional sense. Their mortality risk doesn't increase with age. A 200-year-old Greenland shark is no more likely to die than a 100-year-old, all else being equal. They don't show the progressive deterioration we associate with aging in mammals. This raises profound questions about the biology of aging itself. Is senescence inevitable for all complex life? Or have deep-sea organisms discovered ways to essentially stop the clock, maintaining function indefinitely as long as they avoid predation and accident? These creatures experience time in ways we struggle to comprehend. They've lived through centuries of unchanging darkness, growing imperceptibly, reproducing occasionally, existing in a state closer to suspension than to the rapid-fire existence of surface life. They are living connections to the deep past, organisms whose lifespans overlap with historical events. We consider ancient reminders that biological time can stretch far beyond what seems reasonable or possible, especially in the deep ocean, where conditions change so slowly that patience becomes not just a survival strategy, but the fundamental organizing principle of existence. Water that sinks to the ocean floor today might not return to the surface. For 1,000 years, it will experience the entire future history of our civilization in the cold, dark silence of the deep. Beneath the familiar surface currents that sailors have navigated for millennia, the ocean operates another circulation system altogether, one that moves more slowly, penetrates more deeply, and operates on timescales that dwarf human history. This is the thermohaline circulation, sometimes called the global ocean conveyor belt, a massive current system that connects all the world's oceans in a journey lasting roughly 1,000 years. Water molecules completing this circuit today began their voyage around the time the Crusades ended, have traveled in darkness through the entirety of the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, the Industrial Revolution, and into our modern era, all while moving steadily along the ocean floor. The system works through elegant physics. Differences in temperature and salinity create differences in density, and these density differences drive circulation. Cold water is denser than warm water. Salty water is denser than fresh water. When very cold and very salty water form simultaneously, as happens in polar regions where sea ice crystallizes, freezing pure water and leaving concentrated salt behind, the resulting water becomes so dense it has no choice but to sink. And sink it does, plunging from the surface to the ocean floor in regions near Greenland and around Antarctica, descending thousands of meters in columns of falling water that represent some of the most powerful continuous movements on Earth. This sinking water doesn't simply disappear, it begins a journey. The dense water masses formed in the North Atlantic flow southward along the ocean bottom, moving through the Atlantic basin, eventually joining the massive flow that circles Antarctica. From there, the deep water splits, some flowing northward into the Indian Ocean, some continuing into the Pacific. These deep currents move slowly, centimeters per second, rather than the meters per second of surface currents, but they move continuously, transporting enormous volumes of water across ocean basins and between hemispheres. Eventually, after centuries of travel, this water reaches zones where it gradually rises back toward the surface through a process called upwelling, particularly in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, where it finally encounters sunlight again after its millennial journey through the abyss. The scale of this circulation is difficult to grasp. Every second, approximately 20 million cubic meters of water sinks in the North Atlantic alone, a volume equivalent to 100 Amazon rivers. This isn't a seasonal phenomenon or an occasional event. It's continuous, operating every moment of every day, year after year, century after century, driven by the relentless physics of density differences. This circulation does far more than simply move water. It transports heat from equatorial regions toward the poles, moderating Earth's climate. It carries oxygen from the surface to the deep ocean, making life possible in the abyss. It distributes nutrients throughout the global ocean, supporting marine ecosystems from the surface to the seafloor. Without this circulation, the planet's temperature distribution would be radically different. The North Atlantic region would be significantly colder. Some estimates suggest temperatures in Britain and Scandinavia might drop by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius if the circulation ceased. The tropics might become even warmer. The entire climate system would reorganize itself around a fundamentally different pattern of heat distribution. There's a contemporary concern here, though one that requires careful consideration. Climate change is melting ice sheets and glaciers at accelerating rates, adding vast quantities of fresh water to the North Atlantic. This fresh water is less dense than salt water, and if enough accumulates, it could reduce the density difference that drives the sinking, potentially slowing or even disrupting the circulation. Some measurements suggest the system has already weakened slightly over recent decades, though the evidence remains under active scientific debate. What seems clear is that this thousand-year current, which has operated with remarkable stability throughout human history, may be approaching a transition whose consequences we cannot fully predict. These deep waters carry more than just molecules. They carry chemical signatures from the surface, dissolved gases, traces of human industrial activity, records of the atmospheric composition when they last touched the sky. Each water mass has its own identity, properties that deep-sea creatures have learned to detect and navigate by, using the ocean's memory to orient themselves in the darkness. Some water in the deep Pacific last touched the surface when people were building Gothic cathedrals in Europe. It's been traveling in darkness ever since, slowly aging, accumulating nutrients, becoming something fundamentally different from the water above. The ocean is not uniform. Beneath the seemingly homogeneous surface lies a complex architecture of distinct water masses, bodies of water with characteristic temperatures, salinities, and chemical compositions that maintain their identity as they flow through ocean basins, sometimes for centuries. These water masses are like rivers within the ocean, invisible to the eye but clearly distinguishable to instruments that measure their properties, and apparently detectable to the creatures that live within them. Oceanographers have learned to trace these water masses as they move through the deep, tracking water that sank decades or centuries ago by following its chemical signatures. North Atlantic deep water forms near Greenland, where winter storms and sea ice formation create dense water that plunges to intermediate depths, typically between 2,000 and 4,000 meters. This water is relatively young in oceanographic terms, perhaps only decades or a century old, and it remains oxygen-rich because it was recently at the surface, exposed to the atmosphere. As it flows southward through the Atlantic, it carries this oxygen with it, making the Atlantic deep sea somewhat more hospitable to life than other ocean basins. Antarctic bottom water tells a different story. Formed in the frigid waters around Antarctica, this is the coldest, densest water mass on Earth. It sinks not to intermediate depths, but to the very bottom of ocean basins, flowing along the seafloor itself, sometimes penetrating into the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, creeping northward as a thin layer of intensely cold water beneath everything else. Where it flows, it creates the coldest abyssal environments, places where temperatures approach the freezing point of seawater and remain there year-round, century after century. But the oldest water on Earth flows through the deep Pacific. By the time water masses complete their journey across the Pacific Basin, they may be over 1,000 years old water that last saw sunlight during the medieval period of human history. This water has been slowly aging throughout its journey, and the aging process has transformed it. Oxygen has been gradually consumed by bacteria breaking down organic matter, by the respiration of deep-sea organisms, by chemical reactions with particles sinking from above. The water becomes progressively depleted in oxygen and enriched in nutrients, phosphate, nitrate, silicate, released from decomposing organic matter. Scientists can measure the age of this water through radiocarbon dating of dissolved organic carbon, determining how long ago it was last exposed to the atmosphere. This aging creates a gradient across ocean basins. The Atlantic deep water is youngest and most oxygen-rich. The Indian Ocean contains intermediate-aged water. The Pacific holds the oldest, most oxygen-depleted, most nutrient-rich water masses. Deep-sea creatures appear to recognize and respond to these differences. Some species show distribution patterns that align with specific water masses, as though they're living within particular bodies of water rather than simply at particular depths. A species might inhabit North Atlantic deep water throughout its range, found wherever that water mass flows, but absent from adjacent water masses with slightly different properties. They may be navigating by water mass, using temperature or salinity or chemical cues to maintain position within a preferred environment. The concept is striking. These organisms might spend their entire lives within a single water mass that extends for thousands of kilometers horizontally, but only hundreds of meters vertically. A vast river of specific water flowing through the ocean, and within it, communities of creatures that have made that particular body of water their home. They're not just living in the deep ocean, they're living in specific ancient waters, each with its own history, its own chemical identity, its own slow journey through the abyss. Water masses are memory-made liquid records of where they originated, what they've encountered, how long they've traveled. They transform the ocean from a simple vertical column of water into a dynamic, flowing, stratified system where history moves in currents, where the past flows beneath the present, where time itself becomes something you can measure in the changing chemistry of water that hasn't seen the sun for 1,000 years. The seafloor holds a more complete record of Earth's history than anything. On land, in the ooze at the bottom of the ocean, lies evidence of every climate change, every extinction, every cosmic impact that has shaped our planet over hundreds of millions of years. If ancient water masses carry centuries of memory in their chemistry, the sediments beneath them preserve memory on an entirely different scale. The deep seafloor is Earth's most patient librarian, accumulating layer upon layer of settled material, each microscopic addition, recording conditions at the moment it arrived, each stratum preserving a slice of time. Over millions of years, these layers build into an archive more complete than any continental formation, protected from erosion by kilometers of still water, undisturbed by the geological violence that constantly reshapes the land. Scientists access this archive through sediment cores, hollow tubes driven into the seafloor and carefully withdrawn, bringing up columns of sediment that can span millions of years from top to bottom. A core, 10 meters long, might contain sediment representing 10 million years of history, each centimeter corresponding to 1,000 years. The process requires precision and patience, lowering equipment through kilometers of water, positioning it exactly, then retrieving the core without disturbing the delicate layering that makes it valuable. What emerges looks like unremarkable mud, but it contains within it the story of our planet. The sediment is composed largely of shells, billions upon billions of microscopic shells from foraminifera and other planktonic organisms that lived in the surface waters, died, and sank. These shells accumulated steadily, drifting down like snow, century after century, forming ooze that slowly compressed into layers. But the shells are more than just debris. Their chemical composition records the conditions in which they formed. The ratio of oxygen 1,8 to oxygen 1,6 isotopes in the calcium carbonate depends on water temperature when the organism built its shell. By measuring these ratios in foram shells from different layers, scientists can reconstruct ocean temperatures from millions of years ago, revealing ice ages and warm periods, tracking Earth's climate as it fluctuated through deep time. The sediments contain other materials too. Volcanic ash from eruptions that darkened ancient skies, carried by wind and deposited thousands of kilometers from their source. Dust blown from continents, recording periods when deserts expanded or vegetation declined. Pollen grains that traveled on currents, preserving information about ancient ecosystems. Even micrometeorites, tiny fragments of asteroids and comets that constantly rain down from space, too small to notice individually, but accumulating measurably over geological time. Sometimes the sediments reveal catastrophes. At a specific depth in cores worldwide, corresponding to 66 million years ago, there appears a thin layer of clay enriched with iridium, an element rare on Earth, but common in asteroids. This layer marks the moment when a mountain-sized rock from space struck the planet, creating the Chicxulub crater, throwing billions of tons of debris into the atmosphere and triggering the extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs. The layer is only a few centimeters thick in most cores, representing perhaps a few thousand years of deposition, but within it lies compressed the most dramatic day in Earth's recent history, the impact itself, the global firestorm, the decade of darkness as ash blocked the sun, the collapse of ecosystems worldwide. Other layers tell different stories. Black, organic-rich sediments mark ocean anoxic events, periods when the deep ocean lost its oxygen, becoming a lifeless zone where organic matter accumulated without decomposing. These events, which occurred during the Cretaceous period and at other times, left distinctive signatures in the sediment record, evidence of how dramatically ocean chemistry can change, how precarious the balance is that supports life in the deep. The seafloor archives are more complete than continental rocks because the deep ocean is stable. On land, mountains rise and erode, rivers cut through rock, glaciers scour surfaces, and plate tectonics constantly recycles crust. But the deep seafloor accumulates, undisturbed, layer upon layer, preserving evidence that would be destroyed anywhere else. It has witnessed everything, every climate shift, every evolutionary innovation, every mass extinction, every recovery. The ooze at the bottom of the ocean is memory solidified, time made tangible, history you can hold in your hands if you have the patience to reach the depths where it's been waiting, recording, remembering for hundreds of millions of years. Scientists have found plastic bags in the Mariana Trench and radioactive isotopes from 1,950 seconds. Bomb tests in fish living at the bottom of the ocean, proof that there is no place on Earth, no matter how deep or remote, that exists completely separate from human activity. The discovery came as a surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. When researchers examined amphipods, collected from the Hadal zone of the Mariana Trench nearly 11 kilometers below the surface, in one of the most remote and inaccessible places on the planet, they found microplastics in their tissues. Microscopic fragments of synthetic materials that began as shopping bags, water bottles, packaging, products of human convenience that were used briefly and discarded, had somehow made their journey to the deepest point in the ocean and into the bodies of creatures living there in perpetual darkness and crushing pressure. The pathways are multiple and interconnected. Some plastic sinks directly, carried down by its own density or by attachment to heavier materials. Much of it is ingested by organisms at various depths, broken into smaller pieces by digestive processes, and deposited in fecal pellets that sink as part of marine snow. Creatures that migrate vertically carry plastics from surface waters to depth, and some simply settle slowly, year after year, accumulating on the seafloor like sediment, becoming part of the geological record, a permanent marker of the Anthropocene era, the age when human materials became a component of Earth's crust. Deep-sea camera systems have documented the visible evidence. Plastic bags draped over corals on seamounts, bottles resting on abyssal plains, abandoned fishing gear tangled around rock formations. These observations come from scattered locations across the ocean, suggesting the problem is widespread. The deep ocean, for all its vastness and remoteness, is not isolated from surface activities. Everything that enters the ocean eventually goes somewhere, and for materials that don't decompose, somewhere often means the seafloor. But plastic is not the only human signature in the deep. Researchers analyzing deep-sea fish found elevated levels of radioactive carbon-14 with a distinctive isotopic signature, not from natural sources, but from thermonuclear weapons testing conducted in the atmosphere during the Streech 1,950 seconds and early 1,960 seconds. These tests released radioactive isotopes that were incorporated into the atmosphere and ocean surface, then gradually moved into food webs and ocean circulation. Decades later, these isotopes appear in organisms living thousands of meters deep, having traveled through biological and physical transport mechanisms across decades and kilometers. The discovery is sobering, but it's also scientifically valuable. By tracking these human-made markers, researchers have learned about deep ocean circulation patterns, about how quickly materials move from surface to depth, about the connectivity of food webs across depth zones. Humanity accidentally conducted massive tracer experiments, releasing markers into the ocean, and then, decades later, discovering where they ended up and what pathways they followed. The findings confirmed theoretical models of ocean circulation and revealed that biological transport through migrating organisms moves materials much faster than previously thought. Mercury and other heavy metals tell similar stories. Industrial emissions that entered the atmosphere eventually deposited in the ocean, where they were incorporated into phytoplankton, passed through food chains, concentrated in predators, and eventually reached deep-sea organisms. The same pathways that naturally transport nutrients from surface to depth also transport industrial contaminants. You cannot pollute one part of the ocean without eventually affecting the whole system. There's a paradox here worth contemplating. Humans have affected places we've never been, ecosystems we've barely studied, organisms we've only recently discovered. We've left our chemical signatures in the most remote environments on Earth before we've even catalogued what lives there. Yet these same signatures have taught us how interconnected the ocean is, how materials and energy flow between surface and depth, how nothing in the ocean exists in isolation. Our impacts, unintended though they were in these remote locations, became inadvertent experiments that revealed fundamental truths about how the ocean works as a single, connected system where boundaries are permeable and distance provides less protection than we imagined. The deep ocean produces half the oxygen you're breathing right now, has absorbed a third of the carbon dioxide from our factories and cars, and might contain the cure for diseases we haven't yet learned to treat yet. We've explored it less thoroughly than we've explored Mars. If humanity has left messages in the deep ocean, often accidentally and sometimes regrettably, the deep ocean has been providing services to humanity continuously, invisibly, keeping Earth's systems functioning in ways we rarely acknowledge. The relationship runs both directions, though we're only beginning to understand how dependent we are on processes occurring in the darkness, thousands of meters below the surface. Consider carbon. Since the Industrial Revolution, human activities have released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, from burning fossil fuels, from deforestation, from industrial processes. But atmospheric CO2 levels haven't risen as much as these emissions would predict. The reason is simple: the ocean has been absorbing it. Roughly 30% of all human-generated carbon dioxide has dissolved into seawater rather than remaining in the atmosphere. Much of this carbon eventually reaches the deep ocean through the biological pump we explored earlier, incorporated into organisms at the surface, sinking as those organisms die or are eaten, deposited in the deep as organic matter or dissolved carbon. There it remains, stored for centuries or millennia, removed from the atmosphere. Without this ocean carbon absorption, atmospheric CO2 levels would be perhaps 50% higher than they currently are, and climate change would be progressing much faster. The deep ocean is essentially buying humanity time, absorbing the consequences of our emissions and storing them away from the atmosphere. But this service comes at a cost. Dissolved CO2 makes seawater more acidic, changing ocean chemistry in ways that affect everything from coral reef growth to the formation of shells in microscopic plankton. The ocean is helping solve one problem while developing another, a reminder that Earth's systems are interconnected in complex ways, where solutions in one domain can create challenges in another. The deep ocean also regulates oxygen. While we often focus on forests and trees, at least half of Earth's atmospheric oxygen comes from the ocean, produced by phytoplankton during photosynthesis. But phytoplankton need nutrients, and those nutrients come largely from the deep. The thermohaline circulation and upwelling systems that bring ancient water back to the surface carry with them the accumulated nutrients from centuries of decomposition: phosphate, nitrate, silicate. All the elements phytoplankton need to grow and photosynthesize and release oxygen. Without deep ocean circulation returning nutrients to sunlit surface waters, productivity would collapse. The breath you're taking right now depends on circulation patterns that operate over centuries and on nutrients that may have cycled through the deep ocean for decades before returning to fuel the phytoplankton that produce that. Oxygen. Temperature regulation represents another crucial service. The ocean holds vastly more heat than the atmosphere. The top few meters of ocean contain as much heat as the entire atmosphere above it. Deep ocean circulation distributes this heat globally, moderating temperature extremes that would otherwise make Earth's climate more volatile. The ocean absorbs excess heat from the atmosphere, transports it through circulation patterns, and releases it gradually, preventing rapid fluctuations that would make the planet less habitable. Beyond these planetary-scale services, the deep ocean may hold solutions to specific human challenges. Enzymes from deep-sea bacteria that function at extreme temperatures and pressures have found applications in medicine and industrial processes. Compounds from deep-sea organisms have shown promise in treating cancer and other diseases. Understanding how deep-sea creatures survive extreme conditions has informed everything from food preservation technology to potential approaches for long-term space travel. We're discovering that adaptations to life in the deep often have unexpected applications to human problems that seem unrelated. Every deep-sea species represents millions of years of evolution, solving problems of survival under extreme conditions. Every ecosystem represents intricate relationships we've barely begun to map, and we cannot know which species might hold the key to challenges we haven't yet encountered or solutions we haven't yet imagined. The deep ocean is not just a repository of biodiversity, it's a library of evolutionary solutions, and we're only beginning to learn how to read it. We're developing the technology to mine the deep seafloor for metals we need for smartphones and electric cars, to exploit ecosystems that took millions of years to develop. But we're doing this before we've even catalogued what lives there or understand how these ecosystems function. The deep ocean is becoming accessible in ways that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. Autonomous underwater vehicles can now explore the deep for months at a time, navigating on their own, collecting data, mapping terrain, returning to the surface only when their missions are complete. New materials and engineering approaches allow submersibles to reach the deepest trenches repeatedly, rather than in once-in-a-lifetime descents. Advanced sonar systems reveal seafloor features in such detail that we can identify individual rocks and organisms. Environmental DNA sampling can detect what species live in an area simply by analyzing water samples for genetic material. No need to actually see or catch the organisms themselves. These technologies are opening the deep ocean to systematic exploration and increasingly to exploitation. Perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in growing interest in deep-sea mining. Scattered across vast areas of the abyssal plains lie polymetallic nodules, potato-sized rocks rich in cobalt, nickel, manganese, and rare earth elements. These nodules form over millions of years as minerals precipitate from seawater and accumulate around small nuclei. They're not renewable on any human timescale, yet they contain materials needed for batteries, electronics, renewable energy technologies, resources that might help address climate change, but would require disturbing ecosystems we barely understand to obtain. Deep-sea mining would involve massive machines crawling across the seafloor, collecting nodules and inevitably stirring up sediment in the process. The sediment plumes could spread for hundreds of kilometers, carried by deep ocean currents, potentially smothering organisms far from the actual mining sites. The direct impact zone, where the collectors physically disturb the seafloor, would be stripped of the nodules that provide habitat structure and of the sediment communities that have developed over millennia. Recovery, if it occurs at all, would take centuries or longer given the slow growth rates and low reproduction rates characteristic of deep-sea life. The decision isn't simple. The metals in these nodules are genuinely needed for electric vehicle batteries, for wind turbines, for solar panel production, for the technologies that might help transition away from fossil fuels. Land-based mining often involves significant environmental damage, forced relocations of communities, and hazardous working conditions. Perhaps taking these materials from the uninhabited deep sea causes less harm overall. Or perhaps we should focus on more efficient use of materials, better recycling, and alternative technologies that require fewer rare earth elements. The deep ocean faces other emerging pressures as well. Deep sea fishing has expanded to target species around seamounts and on continental slopes, species that often live decades or centuries and reproduce slowly, making them extremely vulnerable to overfishing. Seafloor cables for global communications and energy transmission crisscross ocean basins, generally causing minimal direct damage, but representing growing infrastructure presence. Bioprospecting, searching for commercially valuable compounds in deep-sea organisms, raises questions about who owns genetic resources found in international waters and who benefits from discoveries made there. International organizations are attempting to develop regulations for these activities, but the task is complicated. Most of the deep ocean lies beyond national jurisdiction, in areas where no single country has authority. The International Seabed Authority, established under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, is responsible for managing deep seabed resources. But debates continue about what regulations should govern mining, what protections should be mandatory, how to balance development with conservation. Some argue for a precautionary approach. Don't permit activities until we understand the ecosystems well enough to predict and mitigate impacts. Others argue this sets an impossible standard that would prevent any use of ocean resources indefinitely. The fundamental question persists. Do we have the right to exploit an environment before we've even properly explored it? The deep ocean took billions of years to develop its current ecosystems. Some of the organisms living there today have been alive for centuries. The nodules proposed for mining took millions of years to form. The decision to disturb these systems is effectively irreversible. On any human timescale, once made, it cannot easily be unmade. Perhaps the answer lies in approaching the deep ocean with humility and patience, traits that the deep ocean itself embodies. It has waited billions of years. It can wait a few more decades while we learn what we're dealing with and make informed decisions rather than rushed ones. The metals will still be there. The potential for discovery and understanding, however, exists only as long as the ecosystems themselves remain intact. After decades of deep-sea exploration, with increasingly sophisticated technology, scientists estimate we've documented perhaps 10% of the species living in the deep ocean. The other 90% are still waiting to be discovered, living their lives in complete darkness, unknown to science, unknown to us. We've traveled far in our journey through the deep ocean, descending from the surface through layers of increasing darkness and pressure, exploring environments that seem impossibly hostile, yet teem with life. We've learned that the deep ocean is not the barren wasteland it was once imagined to be, but rather the largest living space on Earth, comprising over 90% of the planet's habitable volume, home to ecosystems of astonishing diversity and complexity. We've discovered that life has adapted to conditions we once thought impossible. Organisms thrive under pressures that would crush most surface creatures, in darkness so complete that bioluminescence becomes the primary source of light, at temperatures hovering just above freezing, with food so scarce that survival requires patience measured in months or years. We've found ecosystems powered not by sunlight, but by Earth's internal chemistry, communities gathered around hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, where energy flows from the planet itself rather than from the sun. We've learned about organisms that live for centuries, migrations involving billions of creatures every single night, symbiosis so intimate that organisms merge their bodies and share their biology. We've traced how the ocean moves and remembers thousand-year currents flowing through the abyss, water masses that maintain their identity as they cross ocean basins, sediments that preserve millions of years of Earth's history. We've seen how the deep ocean regulates climate, produces oxygen, stores carbon, supports the productivity of the entire marine system. We've discovered our own signatures in the deepest places, evidence that no part of Earth remains truly separate from human influence. And yet, for all we've learned, the deep ocean remains profoundly mysterious. We've explored perhaps 5 to 10% of the deep seafloor with any real detail. The organisms we've documented are often known from just a handful of specimens collected during brief visits to specific locations. We don't know their full ranges, their population sizes, their detailed behaviors, their complete life cycles. Every deep-sea expedition discovers species new to science, sometimes dozens of them, and detailed study of known species continues to reveal unexpected capabilities and behaviors. Recent years have brought surprising discoveries that challenge our assumptions about where and how life can exist. Fish have been found living under the Antarctic ice shelf, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest open water. Microbial communities have been discovered thriving in seafloor sediments, hundreds of meters below the ocean floor itself, living technically within Earth's crust rather than on it. Evidence suggests some deep-sea creatures can detect magnetic fields, possibly using Earth's magnetic signature for navigation through the darkness. We're still finding fundamentally new types of ecosystems: brine pools, underwater lakes, of super salty water that create boundaries as distinct as the air-water interface at the ocean's surface. Asphalt volcanoes, where naturally occurring tar creates unique habitats. Oxygen minimum zones, so depleted of oxygen that they support communities adapted to what amounts to marine suffocation, yet thriving nonetheless. The challenge is fundamental. The deep ocean is vast, dark, and difficult to access. Our observation tools are inevitably intrusive. Submersibles create light and disturbance. Sampling devices destroy what they collect. Our presence changes what we're trying to study. We see glimpses, moments, fragments of lives and ecosystems that operate continuously in our absence, but freeze or flee when we arrive. It's like trying to understand a forest by visiting for 10 minutes at midnight with floodlights. You'll see something, but you won't see the forest as it actually exists. Perhaps this is as it should be. The ocean has kept its secrets for billions of years. It existed long before humans evolved to wonder about it, and it will exist long after we're gone. There's something appropriate, even beautiful, about acknowledging that some mysteries might remain mysteries, that some questions might not have answers, at least not in our lifetimes. The ocean doesn't owe us its secrets. It simply continues being what it's always been: vast, ancient, patient, and alive in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. The deep ocean is the largest space on Earth, where humans cannot naturally survive, yet it's home, comfortable home, to more life than exists on all the continents combined, living in ways we're only beginning to imagine. The deep ocean has always occupied a peculiar space in human consciousness, existing both in literal darkness below us and in the darkness of our ignorance. Ancient sailors told stories of sea monsters and underwater realms. Cultures around the world developed myths about what might dwell beneath the waves. Dragons and serpents, lost cities, creatures of impossible size and power. These weren't simply fantasies. They were attempts to explain a world that existed just below the surface yet remained completely inaccessible, to give form to the mystery of what lived in the depths. The curious thing is how many of those myths turned out to contain truth. Giant squid, which inspired legends of the Kraken dragging ships beneath the waves, are real creatures with eyes the size of dinner plates and tentacles that can reach 40 feet, living in the deep ocean and occasionally washing ashore to astonish whoever finds them. Oarfish, which can grow to 30 feet long and swim with undulating, serpentine movements, might explain countless sea serpent sightings. Whale songs, carrying for hundreds of miles underwater, created mysterious sounds that sailors heard but couldn't explain, attributing them to spirits or unknown creatures. Our modern scientific understanding of the deep ocean is, in many ways, stranger than any myth. The discovery that male anglerfish permanently fuse to females, becoming little more than sperm-producing appendages, is more bizarre than anything from ancient mythology. Learning that the seafloor has mountain ranges taller than the Himalayas and trenches deeper than Mount Everest is tall, fundamentally changed our understanding of Earth's geography. We live on a planet where the greatest geographical Features are hidden beneath water, invisible to anyone standing on land. The realization that the largest migration on Earth happens every night in the ocean, involving billions of creatures moving hundreds of meters vertically, gives us a new perspective on the vitality and activity of our planet. Consider what it means to share a world with an environment so fundamentally different from our own. The deep ocean operates on timescales that dwarf human experience. Currents that take 1,000 years to complete their cycles, organisms that live for centuries, sediments that accumulate over millions of years. It uses energy sources we can't access, deriving life from chemical reactions in Earth's crust, rather than from sunlight. It follows physical rules that seem almost alien. Pressure that would instantly kill us is normal and necessary. Darkness that would leave us helpless is simply the way things are. Cold that would freeze us is comfortable and constant. Yet this alien world isn't on another planet. It's right here, on Earth, just a few miles below the ocean surface in most places. It's closer than the upper atmosphere, closer than the stratosphere, often just a few kilometers down. But it's vastly more difficult to reach than space. We've sent people to the moon. We've landed rovers on Mars. We've sent probes beyond our solar system. Yet, only a handful of people have visited the deepest parts of our own ocean, and most of it remains unexplored, even by robotic vehicles. This should humble us. Despite all our technology, despite our mastery of so much of the planet's surface, the ocean still resists easy understanding. It keeps its mysteries not through malice, but simply through being what it is: vast, dark, pressurized, remote. This isn't a failure of human ingenuity. It's a reminder that Earth still has frontiers, still has places that don't yield to casual observation, still has the power to surprise us. There's something comforting in this. We live on a planet that still has secrets. The universe isn't completely known, completely catalogued, completely understood. Mystery still exists, not in distant galaxies or subatomic particles, but right here, in our own ocean, in places we could visit if we tried hard enough, but which nevertheless remain profoundly unknown. The deep ocean keeps its secrets in darkness, yet in doing so, it illuminates something important about our relationship with the natural world, that wonder and mystery are still possible, that not everything needs to be known or controlled, that there's beauty and value in acknowledging the limits of our understanding. Right now, at this very moment, miles beneath the ocean's surface, creatures are living their lives in total darkness, hunting, growing, reproducing, dying, part of cycles that have continued for millions of years and will continue for millions more, indifferent to time, patient and eternal. In the abyssal plains, tripod fish are standing motionless, their elongated fin rays extended like stilts, holding them just above the soft sediment. They've been standing like this for hours. They might stand for hours more. In the current that flows past them, they wait for the faintest vibration, the slightest disturbance that might indicate food drifting by. Time moves differently here, where patience isn't virtue but survival, where doing nothing is often the best strategy, where simply waiting is enough. In the Twilight Zone, billions of creatures are beginning their migration. It happens every night, the largest movement of animals on Earth. They're rising now, slowly ascending through hundreds of meters of water, following the fading light upward, toward the surface and the food that waits there. They've done this every night of their lives. Their ancestors did it for millions of years before them. Their descendants will do it for millions of years to come. Every night, whether observed or not, this migration continues, a rhythm as reliable as the tide, as constant as the stars. Near a hydrothermal vent on the mid-ocean ridge, tube worms are swaying gently in the current, their red plumes extended into the water. They're absorbing hydrogen sulfide, feeding it to the bacteria living inside their bodies, maintaining a partnership that has existed since these vents were first colonized by life hundreds of millions of years ago. The water here is hot, laden with chemicals that would be toxic to most life. But to these organisms, this is perfect. This is home. This is where they belong. In the Mariana Trench, 7 miles below the surface, amphipods are moving through the sediment. The pressure here would crush any surface creature instantly. Yet these small crustaceans move comfortably, hunting for food particles, living their lives in conditions that seem impossibly extreme, but which to them are simply normal. They've never known anything else. This darkness, this pressure, this cold, this is their world, the only world that matters. Somewhere in the Pacific, a sperm whale is diving. It's descending through the darkness, clicking steadily, listening to the echoes that return from the water around it. The clicks bounce off distant squid, painting pictures in sound that the whale reads as clearly as we read words on a page. It will stay down for an hour, hunting in darkness, so complete that human eyes would see nothing. But the whale doesn't need light. It has sound, and sound is enough. Sound is everything. On seamounts, rising from the ocean floor, deep-sea corals are growing. They extend their polyps to catch particles drifting by, adding microscopic layers to structures that have been growing for thousands of years. These colonies were ancient when human civilization began. They will likely still be here, still growing, long after our cities have crumbled. They are patient. They have time. In the sediments of the abyss, organisms live between particles of mud in spaces measured in micrometers. They process organic matter, cycle nutrients, contribute to chemical processes that help regulate the ocean's chemistry. They're too small to see without microscopes, living in spaces too tiny to imagine, yet they matter. They're part of the system, part of the vast interconnected web that keeps the ocean functioning, keeps the planet habitable, keeps life continuing. And all of this is happening right now. This moment. Whether we think about it or not, whether we observe it or not, the ocean continues, its ancient patterns, circulating, cycling, living. The same processes that have sustained life for billions of years. The same rhythms that will continue long after we're gone. The ocean is vast and mysterious and patient. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be. There's comfort in knowing that something so large and ancient exists, continuing its timeless patterns, indifferent to our anxieties and worries, simply being what it has always been, the deep, the eternal, the great reservoir of life on Earth. Rest well. The ocean is there, right now, deep and dark and alive. It will be there tomorrow. It was there long before us. It will be there long after. The ocean continues, patient, eternal, beautiful.